something I can't remember to consider.
Yeah, they got that transformer back there too. That's harder to move.
Yeah.
Are we ready? Okay, let's call to order the February 5th, 2020 meeting of the Grand Marais Public Utilities Commission. It's a fine day to do work for the good people of Grand Marais. Another fine day.
There we are.
Commissioner Kennedy,
Present.
Commissioner Wilkes is present. Commissioner Passes is absent today. Consent agenda.
No questions with the bills at all?
No, me neither.
Anything to add to the agenda, George, that
Well, you've got my memo
I
there,
have a memo, yes, so that would just be part of the commissioner reports?
I suppose. Would we add to the agenda the item of how to set the agenda?
You can talk about it at your commissioner report.
Let's do that.
Right?
Okay, so we'll hit my memo then.
All right, I'll make a motion to approve the consent agenda as presented.
And second, all in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Mike, you want to talk to us about AMI? Exciting
does.
plans?
Well, Mike wrote this up for me when I was
Sorry,
gone
Tom.
to try and get it in as quick as we can, because part of the equipment takes a long time to get, like the electric meters. So that's why we're starting this right now, even though nothing's probably going to happen for 20 weeks. Real brief what happens is the water AMI is dependent on the electric AMI system. So they have to be built out and running before the water meters can be installed. Because the water meter node, which collects the information and sends it out, it's not like a repeater like the electric meter ones. It doesn't have its own mesh, it just sends one signal. And they're all battery operated also, so it's basically the electric meter's got to be in place before ours to work, otherwise it can't go anywhere. So that's why we did the electric first, and to get all the bugs worked out of most of that. Another thing about the water meters, just because of logistics, it's a lot more complicated than just putting an electric meter. Biggest problem is we're going to have to figure out and access people's homes,
Sure.
and they have to have unobstructed access to their meter besides just getting in their home, and that's going to be quite time consuming as a whole. And then go back to our meters. We probably have about 720 total meters in town, which is about half the electric. But we also are going to have to buy different components to make this system work. We have about 907 or 670 or 95 ones that look like this. This is just like a basic residential between 5/8 and 1.5 inches. They have a single head on them. This part, for the most of them, will not have to be replaced. Some might if they're old plastic ones, or if maybe we find that they're leaking and they're not going very good anyway. But what we're going to have to do, which is from one company, is this, what we got on probably 680 of them, isn't compatible with anything. These actually don't even make anymore. So this has to be removed. We had to buy a new unit like this from Badger, which is approximately $82 a piece. That goes on here. It's got 25 feet of wire, and that connects to what's called the Eaton node. The Eaton node is a system that is made by Eaton that's going to be compatible with our electric system, and that's the one that has like their 20-year battery that sends the signal to get to our system. So, and that's about $100 a piece, and that's the quote you see in the packet. That component takes 18 weeks minimum to get. So our initial thought was we could order those now if you approve it. We can get these down the road. Some of them, like order 100 down the road when we're getting closer. And then the other part of our meters, like say 25 of the meters, are bigger meters, the 2.5 or 2-inch to 3-inch meters. They have to be all replaced because most of them are called a 2-head system, and there's nothing that can create 2 heads into 1 head to hook the node up to send the signal. So they have new, like, electronic register ones that, you know, will be complete. So, and they're those costs for just those meters would probably be, if we bought every one we need, is like, what did I figure, on 29,000. We have to spend like 70,000 on one, and total budget just for material, if we did everything at one time, it'd be about 160,000. But then when we get to the bulk of it, and everybody, you know, we're trying to get a bunch done, you know, there's not enough time, you know, with all the logistics for our staff to do it. So eventually we're probably going to have some outside help actually doing the coordinating and installation and making sure the signal gets outside. Most cases the node can be inside and not outside. Like now you guys know you all got that little like blue box outside. With these new nodes, they should be able to go through the wall and hook up to an electric meter without it, but some might not. We might have to be running wires, poking more holes in the wall, that kind of stuff. So, but initially we want to try this. We'll get some of these down the road. We'll get some of our big electric meters, and to start with, our staff will be installing some of these to start with. Work with Hayden to make sure the software can combine so the billing can work. You know, give us the time to get things up and running before we hit the big push. So
Cool. And this isn't necessarily a surprise. This is what we had
It's what
kind
we
of
expected,
planned
yeah.
on doing.
Yeah, we knew this was going to be a lot more complicated. We knew that electric had to be done before
Yep.
water, we could really get going on it. And the thing about electric is you really have to go pretty systematically because you need to have them next to each other as you're installing them. When we get water, it's not going to be that way at all. We can just install the ones that are easiest to install because people are able to give us access wherever in the system we want,
Mhm.
and then just kind of leave the harder ones for the later.
Because they communicate with the electrical.
Because that once the electrical system is
Meter.
in place, that mesh network is everywhere. So
Kind of surprises me that it takes 18 weeks to get anything these days,
yeah,
especially something that must be kind of cutting edge technology.
Well,
and
I asked Mike
in demand
about-
and
I asked Mike about that himself, and he says, well, most of these are designed for your system.
they have components in them so that they're unique to our system.
kind of custom made.
Well, I'm not sure how difficult, like, they don't probably look any different than anything else, but there's
Mhm.
some setup in them so that they're only capable of communicating with our network. And that's designed that way because a lot of utilities have neighbors, and they don't want to have their meters communicating with each other.
Yeah.
So because of that, they don't have a lot of these just sitting on the shelf waiting to get ordered.
Hmm.
They actually have to put our custom components in it, so I don't think they bother getting ready until the meters are ordered.
Sure.
And then also just because this is kind of a growing industry, and we're still fairly early on in its implementation, so there's a lot of orders and maybe not a lot of production yet.
Yep.
So going ahead with this, that you would see installation happening, what, this summer, or this fall?
This summer and next summer are going to be very busy for our staff with the highway project, you know, and all the water and sewer work. But like Mike said, if we get these components in 18, 20 weeks, when we get time, we are going to hit the easy ones. And that way, when we get a bunch of easy ones in, because they do send two different, I guess, like signals to Hayden, and he's going to have to merge the electric and water into one physically, you know, or manually do it on his computer to get the address to match, so the bill comes up right. So but hopefully by late summer we can be starting installing these
Yeah.
and getting to work on to see how it's going to operate.
We might pick some of the hard ones too that are just.
Yeah.
So how do you know what the easy ones are?
We'll be communicating with people and telling them what we're doing,
Oh.
and people will need to sign up with us to. We need
Ra-
an appointment.
Raise
really,
your
to get
hand
in
and
their
say,
house.
I've got an easy one?
Yeah. And at first, we'll be asking for people's cooperation and actively working with people to get an appointment made. Eventually, when we've got all our equipment and there's people that aren't responding, then we'll have to look at our policy again about adding costs to do manual readings.
You know, some of these meters, they're in crawl spaces that are about this big. You gotta crawl from here to that corner.
Yeah.
So there, lots of it is not,
And it's quite possible that some folks are gonna need to do some plumbing.
yes.
And that's not a surprise either, and we're finding that with the electric system as we're doing our load management build out, that there's some electrical work that people need an electrician to do, just to make sure that their own systems are set up correctly. So it's rolling. This is, this size of bill, we wouldn't normally make an agenda item, but this is just kind of we want to pass on some information and status update. Let you know
Yeah,
what's
so this
going
is
on.
just for 100 units, and if you're saying there's 700.
This is for 100 units of
Yeah.
one component.
Yeah.
The node part, not this part.
Right, right. And so this just getting some of the materials ready so that you can
Yep.
start to work on this.
Yep.
So I make a motion that we approve the purchase order for the, we call them the nodes.
Mm-hmm.
I would second that. All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Yeah, thanks for the update. I mean, we had asked that this be fast-tracked, and so it's good to see that there's progress being made, and, not an easy project.
No, and in terms of the extra resources that you've authorized, where we're really gonna need the help is the physical installation of these, and I don't know if we've got a good plan yet in how we can add resources to do that. So, we're gonna keep working on it.
Okay. Great.
You gonna order those, Hayden?
Should we talk about rate studies?
I spent a lovely day in Owatonna, Minnesota in January. SIMPA put on a seminar that they've offered to all their members on rate making, basically. And the gentleman who did the training, it's normally a 4-day training that we did in 1 day. Seems like we covered almost all of his material. It was,
Your head might have been spinning by the
it
end
was
of the day.
rich, yeah. I got a 60-page 3-ring binder that I brought back with me, and
How many other members were there?
it
it
everybody was
well
there.
represented?
Yeah,
Okay.
and some commissioners were there. Some cities had 3-4 staff
Mm.
members there. It was well attended, and it was well put on. The guy's an expert; he knows what he's talking about. And we talked about theory, what rates are meant to do, and how you think about them, and what the process is to go about setting them, which is not something that we've had to do a lot of complex thinking on here. Our rates are very simple. There's a fixed component, there's a variable component, and we don't even really have different categories of users that we differentiate rate-wise. We have different fixed fees that we attach to different sized meters, and that's just kind of really the only way we differentiate between users. There's a lot of power to that simplicity, but it doesn't allow us to do some of the things that we've been talking about doing, particularly with the climate action plan when it comes to special rates for particular uses, rebates for different types of users. Now that we've got our AMI system in place and we're really starting to gather a lot of detailed data about usage, that helps us think about how, if we make changes to our rates, it would be reflected. And if we're looking for changing behavior with rates, what the best way to do that might be. But we've got a lot of really basic groundwork to cover before we're going to be effective at that. The simplest way to go about it is to do a rate study where they would come in and look at the components of our costs and try to assign those to different users and different users' particular pieces of use. And it's a complex thing that we could probably do ourselves if you let me have a couple of these guys for a month, and that's all we did. Not likely for that to happen, so I think we're going to have to look around for some help. And so this guy actually does this for a living, and some of the SIPA cities have worked with him. And then I talked to George and Chris O'Brien a little bit, and Chris had some tips for us to go look at. So my recommendation is that we need to prepare ourselves to be a little more complex with our rates by doing a rate study. And what we'll be doing in the office is just looking around in February at what our options are and trying to figure out what's the best way to move forward, and come back in March with some recommendations for you to look at.
Okay.
The tricky stuff is, you think about all of the competing interests with the rates, and when you try to move one thing, it has an unintended consequence in another one of your goals. So, for instance, we want to encourage our customers to be able to install solar on their properties, and encourage, if we did that by means of a subsidy where we give them a better rate to do that, or some sort of rebate to do that, that's funded by the people that aren't putting solar on their homes, which oftentimes are people that are less well off. And so we're asking fixed income or low income folks to pay for the subsidy to change the behavior of people that have more means. I mean, that's at least how it might show up initially when we do something like that. And we may very well decide that that's appropriate, because in our long-term goals, that's what needs to happen. But to be able to think about it that way and to understand how all the things are working together, we really need to have better analysis up front.
Yeah, well, I think that sounds like a really prudent thing to do. And, I mean, we're at a point where things are changing, and we've invested in this technology to be able to assess our electrical use much better. And so we can take advantage of that and, figure out some time of day pricing or rate structure that might help us actually save a little bit of money by decreasing our demand at certain times. That's true.
It is
I
true.
think that's true.
I mean, we're already working on that too.
Okay.
And not only are our rates fairly simple, but our rate structure with SIMPA has been fairly simple too. There aren't a lot of factors to consider. So we know kind of with an individual customer how we want to set up load management right now to affect the rates, the wholesale rates that SIMPA is charging us. But as we learn more about aggregate individual use, then we know better how to design our own internal demand-based systems. So like when we reach a certain load on the entire system, what do we want to try to do? What do we want to control to keep that down? And what times does SIMPA pay more attention to that than others? So yeah, it's we've had a system like that in the past, and now we're kind of rebuilding it to be able to do that again. And now by doing a rate study, I think we'll have a better idea of different ways that we can do that, different rates that we can enact to help us meet those goals too.
And I think there's also big changes coming along with electric vehicles, and there could be ways to charge those at separate rates. So just being ready for that.
Yeah.
And to be able to adapt to that in kind of planned, informed way. And the other thing that's happening is there's a real push for electrification of building heat for carbon emission reduction reasons. So that's another issue that could be considered.
Yeah, we talked a little bit about electric vehicles.
So I'm sorry. So that would be off peak. Would be one example of a way to do that, using rates to incentivize electrification of building heat, for instance. So I'm sorry, I interrupted.
That's okay. You think about our neighbors in the co-op and their system. They've got a robust off-peak heating program, and what it creates is their system peak is when the off-peak systems are allowed to turn on in the middle of the night. And the timing of that is great maybe for them, but the fact that they've reshaped their load curve so that it peaks so high at one time is kind of a tricky thing to deal with. And so
And if everybody did that, what would that look like?
right.
Yeah.
And even we don't have to be too worried about everybody at the end of the transmission line. We can really just be concerned about our own selves. But what yeah, what if we had all of our electric heat customers turn on at the exact same time? What does that do to our system? Are we built to do that? We don't really know today, but we will once all our meters are in and we've gathered some data, have an ability to model that and see what it looks like. Electric vehicle charging is a whole nother animal. We have a lot in our climate action plan about looking at that and anticipating it, not even having to encourage it, but just knowing that it's going to happen and being ready for it. And we talked a little bit about that in theory at the meeting, because that was one of the issues that we had asked him to help us with. And a Tesla supercharger for their trucks might draw as much as 2 megawatts of power. And, our whole system is 4.5 on a really cold winter day. So it's suddenly, to imagine having a lot of electric vehicle charging, our system may not be designed to really handle that right now. So that we don't want to just think about, okay, what sort of a rebate do we want to incentivize these users, but we also have to think about where are they going to be located and how many per transmit or, transformer can we handle, and is our distribution set up to handle this, and is there a way that we can control the usage so that we limit the effects that has on us? And it's a complex issue.
Yeah. There's lots of components and parts to it. I think even with the electric vehicles, I was reading that article in the newspaper that Kristen Foster had put together about how funds were generated for building and taking care of, maintaining roads. Of course, a lot of the money that comes from that is from gas tax. So if you start to see changes in, electric vehicles and reduction in gas consumption, that changes the formulas for, it doesn't change the formula, it just changes the amount of money that might be available for road construction projects. And
Sure.
that's one consequence that, obviously would have to get addressed by the state.
The state.
The state.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not, but again, those are the kind of
Big
things
change,
that,
yeah.
if things do change, which, I think the intent is to move in that direction and see significant changes, then,
And all the data that you can find on it is, it doesn't matter what our intent is in Grand Marais.
right,
It's going to happen.
yeah.
It's already a lot cheaper to operate an electric vehicle than a gas-powered vehicle.
Yeah.
It's a lot cheaper. And it's not twice as much to buy one like it was 10 years ago. It's very comparable to buy one now. I mean, there's just not a lot of economic compelling reasons to imagine why electric vehicles won't be everywhere very soon. Just
Yeah.
seems like
Well, I mean, I
we
think
better
it's-
be ready for it.
It's
because
the
gonna happen.
infrastructure that's, I think, the concern, I think, for people is that if there's not a place to charge them, then that's, or a convenient place to charge them, put it that way. I mean, there may be places, but,
Yep, and then we've got to decide how to get enough electricity to all those places too.
yes. Mhm.
Okay, well, I certainly think that's a good idea. Would you like a resolution?
I'm
to
just
proceed?
planning on bringing you options. That's when I think it'd be appropriate for you to make motions, is
Next time.
when you're looking at some options and costs and such.
Okay. Full speed ahead on that. That sounds awesome. Full speed ahead. And does that bring us to commissioner reports?
I think so.
Do you have anything?
I really don't know.
I have a pretty good list here.
You do, I think that you'll be able to fill up the rest. We do have a planning commission meeting at 4 o'clock, so.
Great.
Yeah, so.
Well, Mike and I had discussed kind of how the agenda is set, and I was, I guess Mike had suggested that I talk to you and Annie about the fact that I am adding things to the agenda through my memos, and is that appropriate, and is that okay with you?
Well, I think an appropriate way would be to have that information to Mike prior to the agendas coming out, and that way
I did.
I mean, how do we put items on the agenda? I mean, does each commissioner just say, I want this on the agenda and it should happen, or should there be some kind of
Well, I think
Yeah.
that's the only way. I mean, because we don't meet, every time we meet, we have an agenda, and unless we set the agenda for next meeting now,
Yeah,
I think we have
I
to.
think the question is, I mean, could we get backed up with a lot of issues or side issues that, one commissioner might decide is important and others may not have any interest in it? I mean, I just don't want to see us get to the point where we're not being efficient with the use of our time and, just having a bunch of stuff on the agenda that's, may or may not be relevant for us to talk about.
You've
Sure,
got some
sure, I share that
competing
concern.
interests there, right? There's the need to have information beforehand so that people can get prepared for a good conversation, which would preempt the idea that you meet as a group to talk about what you want on your agenda.
Yeah.
But on the other hand, it's your agenda and you set it every meeting. So even though it's prepared before the meeting, you vote every meeting to decide what the agenda is still.
At the beginning of the
At the
meeting.
beginning of the meeting.
Mhm.
And so you could do both. Have people say, I want this to be put on the draft agenda.
Or
And-
I want this taken off.
At the meeting, you can all then say, I don't want this on the agenda,
Mhm.
and approve an agenda that doesn't include talking about those things.
Well, I mean, I think it's one issue to bring up something and want a discussion. It's another to ask for an action without having had information ahead of time and making sure that there was
Right. and-
adequate time to consider what the issue may be. I mean, I don't have a problem with having a discussion about issues, but if it's not, if it's something that we need, that somebody's asking for us to take action on, I think we should make sure we have all the information in front of us, prior to the meeting, so that we can,
It's a dangerous ask.
well,
I don't know
yeah,
if you've noticed, but all the information is a lot of information.
yeah, I
And
know.
I don't know that it's a fair expectation that if I send everybody 30 things to read on Thursday afternoon, that even in 5 or 6 days, that they're going to be ready to take action. It's better to have like those types of issues carried through on an ongoing way rather than coming up on a meeting. So that's, again, one of your problems here is that you're now meeting once a month and not everybody's here every time, and it's hard to kind of have that agenda that is your agenda that's carrying over time, and it just ends up being, okay, now this is the agenda, and next month it's a different random selection of things. And it might be better to have kind of a ongoing agenda, like you vote to say these are the issues that we want on the agenda on an ongoing basis until they're dealt with. And then if you want to add something to that, you talk about it as a group at a meeting and you add it to that, rather than whatever the list is before the meeting just shows up randomly in people's boxes, and they may or may not be able to look at it or care about it, or we don't even know until they've had a chance to actually sit down together and talk about it.
Yeah.
Well, I don't necessarily have a problem with it. In this particular case, I mean, I sent out this memo. This memo went out with the information packet, so I got it to Mike in
Right.
time. There was some things left out of it. I had copies of the resolution, item 1 there, the resolution of support for the Energy Innovation Act.
Mhm.
I had some backup materials that didn't make it into the information packet. That's the email you got
Mhm.
secondarily. So I think that was just a mistake. I guess the only other issue I have is that if I send a memo and I've got these discussion points, that I wanted them not just have my memo included in the information pack, but actually have those discussion points listed as agenda items.
So rather than just a commissioner
Yeah.
report, that you want to have that specifically on the agenda.
Yeah, and then at the beginning of the meeting, we can look at it and we can say, George, that's too much, or this isn't of great importance, I don't want to have that on the agenda, and then we can decide.
Yeah, I mean, I don't.
So I don't see it a big problem, I just kind of wanted to clarify those particular points.
And we've done it both ways, so we don't really care how you wanna do it, whatever works for you all.
Yeah, I think we just need to make sure that we're being effective with our time. If, you know, we have too many items that just get brought onto the agenda and we can't have the conversation about whatever particular issues are brought up,
Yeah.
that doesn't seem like it's very effective, so.
Well, I think you gotta let me know, and I'll let you know if that's the case. And maybe that's the case here.
Should we find
So,
out?
shall we find out?
Yeah, yeah, that's fine, that's fine. I mean, I'm not objecting to, you know, you're adding this to the agenda. You know, I think these are all issues that we've talked about and had some conversations, you know, regarding in the past, so stuff that comes out of the blue, I might feel a little bit, you know, I've been more hesitant about, just because I want to familiarize myself maybe a little bit more, but,
Okay,
so we can do this.
all right. Well, number one, a year ago, PUC passed a resolution of support for the Energy Innovation Act. I came in and gave us a dazzling presentation, and we approved that resolution. Sent on a letter to the city council asking them to do the same. I gave a presentation to the city council as well. Then they tabled the resolution until the climate action plan was passed. Climate action plan passed barely. And then they revisited the issue and never took action as far as I know. I guess that was the one question I had. So I guess,
There was not
yeah.
a formal decision made up. I think there were, yeah, reservations by a couple council members
And discussions.
Yeah,
Yeah, and so I think it's, a year's gone by, I still think it's very important. It's in the climate action plan. I think it's actually one of the most important things we can do is to act politically, to advocate for state and federal policies that support climate change action. And so I guess the first thing I'd like to do is ask Tim if you'd consider renewing the resolution and sending that on to our state and federal representatives. And then secondly, I would ask your opinion on how best to bring this issue back to the city.
well, I think if the PUC wants to refer this back to the council, then I think there should be a motion, and that should be approved by the PUC to do that. And
Yep.
at that
and
point, then.
That's what I'd like to do.
At that point, then it would be sent through the channels. Mike would, you know, forward that to the council, and the council could decide to take that up.
Okay.
I think that would be the process. I mean,
That'd be one way. I mean, the other way would be you could go to the council and ask.
Yeah, I could bring-
Not to put it on you necessarily, or, yeah.
I mean,
I
I
would
could,
imagine you would talk about it anyway as an action that the PUC took, just as a matter of what you would normally do at a council meeting.
well, and when I would give a commissioner's report, that would do that, you know. But I think, again, to have the PUC make a motion to refer this back to the council, again, for consideration or reconsideration,
Mhm.
would be an appropriate way to make, bring that to the council for their potential decisions if they want to take that on. So,
Okay, would you be in favor of such a thing? Because I would make that motion.
We've already supported, as public utilities, the support for that legislation.
Mhm.
And I think we could reaffirm our support and ask the council to also endorse.
Okay, just kind of do what we did last year and see how it goes?
Well, I think that's all we can do at the, you know, Utilities Commission, I mean, we don't have the ability to make the decision for the council, so,
Right.
so,
Okay.
so if that's the case, and we want to have the council readdress this, then I would say, motion should be made and approved, and
Okay.
that puts it in process.
Okay, well, I would make two motions. The first would be I would make the motion to reaffirm our commitment, or our support for the Carbon, Energy Innovation and Carbon Dividend Act, and to have a copy of that sent on to our state and federal representatives.
I'll second that.
Okay, and all in favor? Aye.
Okay,
And then I would make a motion to send a copy of that resolution to the city council and ask them to again consider possibly supporting the Energy Innovation and Carbon Dividend Act, and/or some other sign of support for federal and state climate-friendly policy.
I'll second that. I mean, I think that was one of the parts of the conversation at the council, is that other council members felt that there may be other mechanisms rather than, than this legislation to do that.
Right.
And I don't know that any additional research took place with regard to, seeing if there was any other options.
I don't think anybody intended to.
No, I don't think,
Well, I think Jay had said that he thought that he could draft a letter that kind of got across the intent of support for climate change action. That wouldn't be a specific endorsement of any specific legislation.
that was kind of where I thought it got left, but,
Yeah.
and I don't know if that letter ever came to be, so,
I think not.
yeah.
Second?
I think I already did second it, didn't I?
Okay.
I think I did.
Okay.
If I didn't, I do.
Hayden says no.
Okay. All right, then.
He's got it now.
Okay,
All in favor? Aye.
aye.
All right.
Okay. So at next week's council meeting, then I will bring this, as part of my report on the Utilities Commission meeting to the council, and, we can then discuss that and ask if their council is willing to put that on a future agenda.
Okay.
Seem like the right,
Yeah, I'll probably have a agenda item, we'll just call PUC update.
okay,
Yep.
Attach this with a short memo.
sure, okay,
You can take it.
okay.
And then I would make a note that I think last year when we passed this, I don't think the resolution was ever signed and sent to representatives. And can we follow through and do that this year?
From the commission?
From the PUC, yeah.
Oh, okay. Mhm.
Our invited guests are arriving
Good. See?
Really? Are you
for
just
our
kidding?
4 o'clock meeting.
Oh, okay.
I would guess.
Should we try it? Number 2? We talked about doing a 21 kilowatt solar project and possibly getting a lot at the Cedar Grove.
Yeah,
Talked to
and,
Mike about that.
Yeah.
And it sounds like maybe they want to put a dog pound there as well.
and, I saw that email from Mary, she was asking for some kind of specific language to
Mhm.
be brought to the EDA.
Yeah, and I wrote a letter and Mike thought that the letter was superseded by discussions he had had.
Well, I thought it was redundant with discussions we'd already done. And then maybe the issues shifted since your conversation in January too. So I don't think that the best approach is for the PUC to go ask the county board to sell them this lot to build solar on, if the sheriff and the city are gonna go to the county board and talk about acquiring the lot for multiple different reasons. And that just seems like the easier way to go about it.
Which is fine with me if there'd still be space available for solar development.
Well, again, this is the first I've heard that there were potential other
Yeah,
interests.
because it's brand new.
But we talked about it at the commission meeting that we only needed a small portion of that entire lot for this portion of, this part of the solar project. Even if we expanded it to a larger solar project that's, what, 2.3 acres or something like that?
Almost 2.9.
2.9 acres, you know, even the dog pound on there takes up, again, just a small portion
Yeah,
of that size property too. And I mean, I don't know what other uses that are being considered or discussed, but,
that's the main one. And it's, I mean, when we went to the meeting for the EDA in December to talk about this, they were willing to let us acquire an acre of it at reduced price or some, whatever price the city and the county board were willing to offer it at. And I mean, that was for a big solar project. We don't need the lot to do a small solar project, which isn't to say we can't do a small solar project up there or a big one in the future if we want to. But if we're just looking at site control, I think the path is there and it doesn't have to be led by the PUC at all. And it just feels awkward to go back to the EDA board and ask for them to be willing to sell us a lot when we literally just did that. And so maybe let this other effort drive the vote here, and the city will end up with it, and we'll be able to have it for doing this in the future if there is a project we want to do.
yeah, it seems like there's a broader community interest with multiple types of activity going on this parcel. So why don't we let that kind of unfold? And I mean, if the EDA and the county are aware of the PUC's interest and of the dog pound interest, then, and if there's maybe there's even other uses that somebody not bringing up as a at this point, but
Yep,
that
and
could be appropriate for that parcel, then put them all in the same lot. I mean, yeah.
yep, that's good by me. And Mike, can you kind of communicate that to the EDA?
Yeah,
Okay. Are you going to go to the EDA meeting?
I don't know. They're, I mean, we've laid the groundwork with them on the idea that we might acquire the lot.
Mhm.
And I think the next step is really to talk to the city council and to talk to the county board before we go back to the EDA. I think the next time we talk to the EDA, we need to be ready to do an acquisition. And
Well, does the EDA, I mean, I just don't want to get the EDA to get the idea that, oh, the solar thing's not happening, because Mary knows that big project didn't go through.
she does.
So does she know now that we're still interested in a smaller project?
She knows that we're gonna still talk about acquiring that lot, yes.
Okay.
I mean, if you want the smaller project, like I said, we don't need that property to do a 21 kilowatt project. As a matter of fact, it would not be the easiest place for us to do it. But if the idea is we want to have one there because that's where we want it, then let's let this other process get us the property, and then we can look at where we want to put this on site.
Mhm. I guess I feel like it would be good to get a site for not only the small 21 kilowatt project, but also have space available for future projects.
Yeah, I would agree. I mean, I think that gives us the option for, in the future, having control of the space that we can use for this purpose. And and there could be some, cost savings just with shared, if a dog pound's gonna get built in there, a driveway that has to be put in for a dog pound could serve for access to the solar,
Yep, that seems fine to me.
Yeah.
and so splitting some of those costs might be a benefit to both, both users.
Okay, so we'll go forward with that as discussed.
So what would the process be? I mean, is you're suggesting that it go to the council and the
Yeah,
council?
so far, the only people that have talked about it are the sheriff and the mayor and I think we want to broaden that conversation to the boards that actually make the decision about selling the price there.
Mhm.
If it's going to be less than what the EDA's asking price is, which is what we want, I think,
Mhm.
for this type of public purpose.
Mhm.
And plus, both of those boards kind of have a vested interest in that use, if it's where we want to put the dog pound, so
Yeah.
that they need to be brought up to speed on that conversation, just policy level,
Mhm.
to move forward.
Yeah.
Okay,
Okay.
and that information came to me after I wrote this memo.
Yeah,
That's the reason
okay.
that
Yep.
wasn't more clear.
Yeah.
Also within two, there's kind of the issue of the 21 kilowatt solar project. We had voted to proceed with that at our January meeting. And Mike, I was just curious, do you think it's feasible that might happen in 2020? And could a local contractor do that job?
I don't know if there are any local contractors anymore.
I know that Peak Electric in Lutzen has the capability and the interest in doing solar projects.
Yeah, I don't see why we couldn't do it in 2020.
Okay,
If you still have interest in doing it on this site, we probably need to wait until we know for sure we're gonna acquire it. Otherwise, if you just wanna do it, I'd put it up at the Public Works garage again. And
well, I mean, I
probably
think,
wanna wait till spring before we do that, so.
well, let's wait and see if we get the Cedar Grove lot, and I think that's a good spot to put it.
Yeah, because we're not gonna do anything right away, so I mean, it's not gonna happen until summer, so we've got a
Okay.
few months to
Okay.
So just to be clear about
let this
that,
play out a little bit.
I'm not planning on taking any action on that for the next 6 weeks.
Until the land issue is resolved.
Or until and you've decided for sure where you want it, and we're closer to when weather actually allows it to happen, and lots of other things, it's just not ripe right now, so I get it, you want it in 2020, got ya. But
Okay.
if you want to have like weekly updates on our activity, I'm not planning on doing anything for a while.
That's fine. My only concern is that Peak Electric might, or in some other local installer might book up for the season.
Good for them, good for us. I mean, why would that be a bad thing?
Well,
I mean, what's the purpose of us hiring a local? It's just to let them build their business. If it's built, great.
okay. Very good. Let's see. The other issue, Tim, I had thought of is doing an incentive for the Cedar Grove Business Park for business owners or landowners there to put in some solar and have that be an incentive for people to put solar in at Cedar Grove.
Yeah, explain to me how that would work. So-
Well, I think it could be as simple as a 1 year. I think Mike and I had some discussions about this, and that that really falls into the subject of the rate study, and subsidizing one small segment of our customers at the expense of others, and but I think if we and so I'm really all in favor of going through the rate study process and really understanding much better what the best way to incentivize renewable energy might be. But for now, I think that just to kind of move things forward just for this summer, we could do a very simple, a small rebate for anybody within Cedar Grove that wanted to put in a solar system, say 10% of costs. And just have it be 1 year, and that might be something that the EDA might appreciate being able to use as a selling point for selling their projects, and it meets our interest in promoting renewable energy in the community, and it's a measured, not terribly expensive, doesn't set any major precedents.
Yeah, I mean, this is the kind of issue I think that, I'd like to have, you know, little time to think about and kind of see how it really actually would come to be. And
We don't have a lot of customers up there right now.
Yeah.
And when we've talked in the office about designing programs like this, one of the things that I want to make sure we do is understand what the barrier is to the behavior we're trying to affect. You know, if we offer this program, my suspicion is no one will take us up on it anyway. And then what have we accomplished? I mean, I don't know.
I think there's
If
an
we
awareness
talk to our
raising.
customers about, hey, have you ever thought about doing this? And, you know, what would make it more interesting to you? I mean, it was only 6 or 7 of them. It wouldn't take that long to do some pretty detailed research into this issue. And we might find that there's no program we can offer that's going to affect their behavior. Or we might find that it'd be as simple as a rebate like you're talking about. And this is for, you know, EV is the next thing we're going to be doing where we're talking about programs like this. And it's the same thing. Let's not assume we know why
Right.
Best Western doesn't have any EV chargers. Maybe they just don't think it's worth their time to spend on it, and it doesn't matter if we give them $500. They're still not going to want to spend their time on it. So if we just talk to some of these customers about it first and do some market research.
yeah, I mean, I think that's, in my mind, maybe a more appropriate way to get into this. You know, I just, feels like we're just shooting from the hip, just saying, well, this might be a valuable tool to use, but we don't know, and we haven't had any communications with those businesses in Cedar Grove, so to just throw it out there, you know, it just feels, to me, it just feels premature.
And we really need to be
Okay.
clear about your goals, about what you want this to accomplish too, to help us design it. Because right now, this is not terribly specific, right? It's still pretty flexible, and we would make sure that the way that it actually gets crafted would try to accomplish the goals you're telling us that are yours.
Okay.
The other
Hey.
part about this, though, that is really something I want you to think about is we're now acting like the EDA is our partner, and we're offering these things to them as something that they can use too. But we haven't really built that relationship yet, and I think we ought to.
Well, that's what.
And just, you know, saying, hey, here's a program, will you use it, is different than let's talk about ways we can collaborate to, you know, have our goals, which is to get some of our climate action plan stuff achieved, and your goals, which is to sell more lots and to have happy people up there.
I guess that was
together.
my point, was to take this to the EDA. But hey, before we go, I wanted to talk about this, the idea, the city EV fleet evaluation study. And is there, Shane, can you give us a quick update on whether the county can be included in that?
We're trying to get them included. I talked to Kirsten Foster, and she was excited and is putting me in touch with other people at the county. So waiting to hear back, sending follow-up emails, that kind of thing.
Okay. Yeah, I think that's really important to have that happen.
Yeah.
And I would even suggest that, well, can you let us know how that's going?
Yeah.
And what are the obstacles to that? And specifically funding?
Well, the grant we were approved for was doubled by CERTS to partner with either the county or Grand Portage. And so
Okay.
we've reached out to both. And so we have a budget of $5,000 to do the assessment. We have to pay for the devices themselves and the data collection. But then the assessment at $5,000 through Sawatch Labs, which is the group that's going to do the assessment, they can do up to 20 vehicles for $5,000. And the city doesn't really have 20 vehicles that would be worth studying. So, yeah, we're reaching out to the county. The barriers are just, like getting them to respond right now. That's the biggest barrier. But Kirsten was out of the office, and so she's kind of getting me the right contacts as she's around.
Okay.
Yeah.
That seem like a good idea to you?
I mean, I don't have any problem with it, I'm just wondering how that becomes a public utilities issue to have them.
Because we sell them the juice. And it's part of our
Well,
climate
not
action plan.
necessarily we do.
For the county?
Well, I'm not opposing the county getting involved with this, I'm just wondering how the PUC gets involved with asking the county to.
Well, the PUC is only involved because George is asking about it. You know, Shane's involved
Right.
as
From
the
the
city's
climate
Yeah.
action plan.
sustainability coordinator.
Yeah,
So it's a program that you're probably interested in,
yes.
but it's being conducted by the city.
So really, through Shane,
Yeah,
Yeah.
there's not a
Yeah.
policy question in front of you here.
yeah,
This is going on, we're talking to them, we're encouraging them to be involved. They'll have to make their own decision. We haven't even told them they need to pay for anything, so I don't know that there is an obstacle other than interest and resources of time.
Okay.
yeah.
Kirsten's aware of the costs, so.
I mean, I would say, yeah, continue the conversations and hopefully they'll decide to, that this is an important thing and they'll get on board with it, but,
Yeah.
yeah.
Okay, and with that, anything else? We can, what we didn't get to, we'll get to next month, and we're adjourned. Thanks.
If not, do we have a motion to accept the agenda as presented?
Also move to approve it.
I'll back that guy up.
Okay, motion has been made and seconded to approve the agenda as presented. Any discussion? All those in favor, vote aye. Aye, opposed? Motion passes. We have minutes from our previous meeting, November minutes. Short and to the point.
Yep.
I'll make a motion to approve the minutes.
I'll second it.
Motion has been made and seconded to approve the minutes from the November 6th, 2019 meeting. Any discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor vote aye.
Aye.
Aye, opposed? Motion passes. We have a public hearing for Mickey and Dee Brazel requesting a conditional use permit to operate a single-family lodging unit in an existing single-family structure within the mixed-use commercial residential district at 23rd Avenue West. Mike, anything you want to say about it?
We'll get the aerial if people want to look at it on the screen, otherwise. There was one comment that we did receive in the office, a letter that you can see.
Having some.
And then there is a video, or the overhead aerial photos in the packet too. Just kind of points out the neighbors. Of course, the direct neighbor to the east already has one of these conditional use permits.
Yep.
The neighbor to the east of them, in the middle of those three properties, has also received permission to do this, although I don't think it's currently being used that way. The neighbor to the west across and one down, that little cabin in the back is being used that way. This is a pretty common use in the neighborhood these days. To address the letter's concern and an issue that I know you are all generally concerned with as well, if you look at the east side of the property, there's where the grass is kind of dead. That's currently being used as off-street parking for boat and some vehicles. So there's could be a number of off-street parking spaces if you wanted that to be a part of your consideration.
Yeah. And is there already a little ramp or whatever there at the curb, or are they just going over the curb?
I think they're just going over the curb. I'm not sure.
Yeah, they stored firewood in there for a while, and then they parked some vehicles. I think they had their boat in there for a
Yeah.
while too.
Yeah, and I mean you can see tire tracks all over the yard there.
Yeah. And there is a fence between the Brazel property and
Lonnie.
Lonnie's property
Yeah.
to the east.
No, the way these lines show up on the map is pretty accurate north and south, but east and west it's always off a couple of feet, and that's just the artifact of the slope we're at and some other things.
Okay.
The the line is that both of theirs and Dupree's property, those buildings are very close to their west lines. So you take those lines and kind of shift them east a few feet, and that's a little more accurate.
Okay.
Is this, what is the regulations for the city for staying, like how many days
If
or weeks or whatever?
if they're asking this to be lodging, then they are allowed to stay any length of time from a day to as long as they want. If it's residential use, then it has to be at least 30 days.
Yeah, in the letter we received, since this is a public hearing, this, needs to be entered into the record. We have a letter from Helen Muth and David Quick, who are property owners on the north side of First Street, across from the library. So they're on this map that we have, it's on that corner to the right side of the photo. And they're basically addressing the concern about parking in general on the streets, and just making it a point that it becomes a challenge with the on-street parking for the library and the other uses that currently exist, most of which don't have off-street parking available to them. So I think they're just trying to make the point that that parking is an issue in that area.
It's an issue in every area in the city of Grand Marais, and down there it is congested, but I've sat in that house for many years on the deck with Bobby Don, so I'm familiar with it, and it will be a noisy place for them, but I don't see any objection to it without all the traffic and confusion down there. But parking is a problem wherever you want to go around here.
Yeah, and I think, they have probably more on-street parking because they're a corner lot
Right.
than others. I mean, a lot of times you end up with,
Well, there's a pretty good driveway behind there that Bobby Don used to store his wood.
right.
He was the only one that would get small pieces of wood, and I was his best customer for years because it's fit on my patio burner. And so a lot of traffic came in and out of there over those years, and there is room for at least two places on that driveway.
2 parking spots?
And I don't know if they use the garage, they could drive into the garage, the porthole or whatever that is back there. So
A
there's
creative
probably
use, you
two
could fit a lot more than
spaces
2
for
cars.
sure that are right there on the property. And people could get their luggage and so forth right out of the car and take it into the house. So I don't see it as a impediment.
I guess I'm not quite following one question. I am looking at the map and I see the area. I am aware of the residents. I know that where there was the boat frequently parked, and I know that, and I don't even know if that was really a proper parking or driveway. Like as we said, I don't think there's a.
There's not a curb cut.
There's not a curb cut.
Yeah.
And, I mean, because parking is always such a problem, they were creative about it. They put up a cone, they did what they needed to
Oh,
sort
on
of
the other
protect.
side.
They do
Yeah,
it sometimes on
yeah.
both sides, that
Oh,
you
okay.
wouldn't want, you'd want to preserve a spot on the front so it's easy to get in. And they would work to be able to get that boat out, So I mean, I get it, like sometimes just looking at this map and seeing this spot right here where the neighbor is saying like this is sometimes an issue, they might, I can imagine them being creative. But what I guess I don't understand is can we insist that they use that as a parking, as a driveway?
Yeah.
When it's not even really one?
Sure, and you don't have to tell them how to solve the problem, but you can, and it often is the case that you'll require that they offer a number of off-street parking spaces as a condition of allowing that use.
Okay.
Yeah.
So,
And in this case, they actually have the ability to do it. They've already been using it as such. So it doesn't, it's not onerous for us to ask that.
I mean, we have done that with, well, I don't know that we have done it with others.
You have done it with others. There's been others where you haven't. It's kind of been
Yeah.
intermittent. This has been a topic that you've, I think, talked about for all of them for the past couple of years. In some cases, you've made it a condition of the permit. In some cases, you haven't.
Yeah, I mean, I wonder if by requiring them to have on-street parking or on-site parking, that by creating a driveway, you take away a street space for the width of the driveway. Do you really gain anything?
Are you
know?
gaining?
Yeah,
Good
you know,
point.
because you have a driveway width, plus you have to have a certain, well, just what the Quicks complain about is that if somebody
Yeah.
parks right up to the edge of your driveway, then can you actually get in there very, very easily and, you know, are you
Although-
better off just leaving the on-street parking to provide the needed,
Yeah, in this
Parking.
case, I don't think that would be the case. I literally think you could put 4 cars on that lot if you wanted to.
I mean,
So-
clearly you can get 2
Yeah.
without
Oh,
even
yeah.
thinking about it.
yes, you could.
So that would, you know, you're already +1 on the width of the driveway, so, I mean, I would say that that's not, it wouldn't be a lot to ask, and they've already been doing it. And I get that, you know, we want to be consistent, but I feel like this addresses the needs of the neighbors and
Mhm.
tries to keep everything in balance, you know.
Well, and I think too, if you look at the four things to be considered as part of a conditional use permit, you know, that the use conforms to the land use, the comprehensive plan, that clearly this is a use that's allowed within this zone district that's, you know, already, the use is compatible with the existing neighborhood, well, there already are these types of uses that exist. I mean, it's a mixed-use district, and it's probably a pretty clear example of, you've got the brewery on
On the one side.
one side,
Yeah.
vacation rental business on the other,
Mhm.
you know.
There's no question that they're surrounded by this very thing, you know. I'm not seeing any, I mean, have they said anything about, you know, do they really want to continue to, you know, use this yard as a driveway instead of as a yard? I mean, do they have any comment about that?
Didn't,
He's parked his truck on that yard many times loading the wood, so.
I don't know if they have
I
a
got it,
position.
but I mean, I'm, you know, I'm playing
It's
mind
very
reader.
level there.
You know, this is where their father lived, and he doesn't live there now, and so maybe that was okay for Dad, but maybe it's not okay for them. I mean,
I think it is, based on our conversations. They've talked about a lot of different potential things they wanted to do with the property, this being one of them, but maybe other development options, other ones. And because they know, and we talked about parking, that we talked about a lot of different configurations of how they might park people on the property. So I think they recognize that that is likely something they'll have to do.
okay.
I mean, it'd be pretty simple to do. I mean,
Yeah.
Yeah.
it's flat, it's already been used for that. They probably want to put in a curb cut to make it.
To make it nicer.
More accessible
Yeah.
for somebody. I mean, pulling up in their car, running over the curb might not be the thing you want your guests to do, but. Any other thoughts?
I just want to be clear that I will be abstaining from this vote. This is my sister. Just want you to remind the group, this is the 3rd time this has come before us since November of 18. Here's another one, affordable housing,
Or just
leaving the
housing.
market. Well, by affordable, I mean not hundreds of thousands of dollars, you know.
No, agreed. And yet,
Well, I'm in favor of it because of the history of the property and my knowledge of it. But I can say this, that they better get an elderly couple in there that can't hear very well because it's damn noisy down there in the summertime with the bands. Some of them come outside there. So it's,
in the tent. yeah.
that's not my decision, but I would make a motion to approve it.
Is
And
that
are
what-
we saying that, and with the motion, are you implying that they have to create off-street parking with it?
Sure.
Provide one off-street parking space?
If it's just one, I mean, then why would you do it if you're gonna, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Well, are we,
And do we have to be that precise, or?
Well,
You might as well. If you think it's an issue, I think it serves you better to be accurate with
Yeah.
the number you want.
Yeah, and I think requiring two is not, would not be a stretch and would not be hard.
Is that part of your motion then, to
Sure.
include 2 off-street parking
Sure.
spaces? Okay, we have a motion. Is there a second?
I'll second it.
Motion second. Any further
I
discussion?
have one more other further discussion. If we're being technical, does it matter? Do you say like a minimum of 2 off-street parking? I mean, since there's
Gotcha.
been conversation that they could have 4 cars there.
Yeah, so a minimum of 2.
It's a pretty small house.
If you,
I'm just-
It's a one,
I mean,
one,
I'm gonna say, it's not
unit.
exactly like,
I am
you know,
familiar with it, I know it, I'm just looking at, you know.
Yeah, you know,
if you
they're-
say 2, as a condition, you know, if they provide 4, they've met your condition.
Thank you, Michael.
yeah, they probably wouldn't want to take up their whole yard with parking space.
You know,
You could do that if you
Well,
had.
You could
we
probably
just
rent
stayed at
it
a
to
place
Fisherman's
that
Picnic.
Grass
had a
isn't very
shocking
good
amount of
down
parking
there.
Grass
spaces in
isn't
a
very
very
good.
small place, and it was all gravel. There was no grass on the whole thing. I mean, this now it becomes more of a market-driven question. How do they want to operate it?
Yeah.
And what do they see that on the property that's of value to use? And I don't know if that yard is particularly useful to them but that's kind of up to them, right? As long as
Right,
they can
yeah.
meet your conditions, they get to do it however they want.
Yeah.
Mhm. Okay.
Great,
Michael?
satisfied.
Okay. Any further discussion? All right, hearing none, all those in favor, vote aye.
Aye.
Aye, opposed? And an
I
abstention.
abstain.
All right,
Great.
this will be referred to the city council at our meeting next week. Next on the agenda. Old business, the housing implementation plan, the housing options.
We're calling it old business, but it feels so fresh and new this time.
Yeah, yeah, that'd be great.
Jeff?
Good evening.
Welcome back.
Yeah. Beautiful drive up here, that's for sure.
We've got some sun.
Do you want me to launch right in, or do you
Please
want to?
do.
Yeah.
Yeah, the information was included in our packet. But it looks like you have tables here that maybe, you know, explain this a little bit, even in a little
I
bit
even,
different fashion.
I have even more handouts for you.
Even more, excellent. Well, go ahead, start,
All right, let's see if I can get this to work. Maybe should I try the PowerPoint? See if it's, I didn't use any fancy fonts, so. Should be okay? Okay, great. Well, as you mentioned, we sent out a brief memo and then some handouts for you to at least start to dig into the details of this stuff. So it's a lot of information, so please tell me if you think we need to go to a higher level or need to step back or you have some basic questions, anything like that. Just feel free to pause, whatever you want to do. But I'm going to go through some slides. I'm going to try to focus on the potential residential building types and talking about those. I think the two big questions, well, there's three big questions. I think two of them are more important tonight, and the question about where, I think, is more important at the next meeting. But I think we should start to talk about that. That might be an easy question, because if it's all residential areas, it's an easier question. So anyway, what we're going to try to cover tonight is briefly talk about the housing regulations implementation plan that you approved, I think approved last fall, and that went to the council, if I recollect correctly. Talk about current allowed residential uses really quick. Existing residential character, kind of quick. Mike told me quick, so we're going to try to stay.
Because we already did that one.
Yeah, and then
That's a
we'll
good-
jump into potential building types, building dimensional / form standards, and then we just want to talk about, where you think you want to go with this, which housing types are ones that we should really dig into for changing in the code. So really briefly, the Housing Regulations Implementation Plan, the study, the purpose was to identify the priority housing regulation barriers to address. We came up with a number of those. You guys prioritized the ones that this secondary project's focused on. So our understanding of the goal of this project is to update the housing regulations to enable and attract more types of housing development. And what that means is identify and define a broader range of housing types in the zoning ordinance, differentiate and add dimensional standards by housing type, not just by zoning district, develop design standards for multifamily housing types where appropriate or where needed, and then identify where each of the housing types should be allowed. Does this need to be on, or is it on? It's on. It is on, okay.
He's just here, they're hearing it.
Okay.
It doesn't get amplified.
I don't see
for-
any lights on.
It doesn't get
Somebody-
amplified for us
Yeah,
at all,
okay,
so.
okay,
Just for the.
yeah. I assume that, I think that you've seen this, so the project phases are kind of 3 phases. We're in phase 1, obviously, with this meeting. So January, February, developing additional housing types and standards for Grand Marais ordinance. Phase 2 is determining the appropriate locations for each housing type, and then working with the zoning map. And then phase 3 is the actual review and adoption of a new zoning ordinance, or changes, amendments to the zoning ordinance, and then amendments to the map as needed. And so you can see on there, say we have for sure 3 meetings with the planning commission, probably 4, because we could meet with the planning commission when the open house happens, if that makes sense. And then 1 meeting with the city council is what's in the project scope right now. So first handout. And we're not going to talk about these a lot yet. This will come up later, but just so you're aware of them. So the zoning ordinance has purpose statements for each of the zoning districts. And in talking to Mike about this, we work on lots of zoning ordinances. Oftentimes, those purpose statements aren't even in the code, so it's hard to know what the purpose of some of the districts are over time as they get applied in different places and things change in the ordinance, but the purpose statements don't. So it's good that you have them. One thing that we identified up front is in the residential districts, since we're focused on the residential districts, is R1 is, even the name is permanent residence versus R2 multifamily. So, just the terminology probably could be improved upon. But even that being said, one of the issues we identified was R2 doesn't allow multifamily without a conditional use. So even though it is the multifamily district, it's not allowed without that CUP. And then you'll see on the screen, on the positive side, R1 says provide a mix of residential options, and R2 says, areas suitable for the location of apartment buildings, row housing, and the like. So, the work that you're trying to do here, I think, is being addressed in the purpose statements. Not that they should or shouldn't or won't change as part of this project, but at least there's, I think they're speaking to what you want to do with this project. And then, kind of a light bulb for me or us was the R districts, which is referred to in the zoning ordinance, I think includes RCN. I don't know. We can determine if that's true or not, but it's sure, the way the dimensional standards are set up, it's treating RCN as a residential district. So, and there it says mix of residential, commercial, and government. But again, it talks about development that's residential scale and appearance, comparable with the surrounding residential area. So it's all that language, I think, is really good for what you're trying to actually do with the standards and the uses that you want to allow. So, so these are all the purpose statements for all the districts, and my intent wasn't to go over that anymore tonight, but if you want to and have questions about them, or think there's something that we should talk about,
We can come back to those. The next thing is the current zoning ordinances allowed residential uses. So this was a handout to you, and I won't spend tons of time on this either. But the exercise here is, in your code, the uses are only identified in each district. And so you can't really get a view of what does the city allow in each district and then across the district. So, where is an apartment building used, or where is a 3-story building allowed. So what we did is we just created this table. So the districts are across the top, and then the left-hand column is, in quotes, the uses that are permitted or conditional just by reading each district. So, you can look across there and start to get a view of how residential uses are broken down today. So it gets pretty detailed with 3 or 4 units versus 5 to 10 units. And another place it says 5 or more units. 3-story, it's like all these different things that are broken down and treated differently. So by the end of this meeting, the way I think we're going is this table for residential uses would be updated with residential building types, is where I think this is going. So, and then you'll see that we categorized things by household living, so where people live versus group living. And then below those categories, I just put in there the actual uses that are identified in your zoning ordinance. So you, in one of the districts, actually, literally just one of the districts, that SC district, it says congregate living. Otherwise, I don't think that's really mentioned anywhere else. So, so opportunities to change things in that regard. And then lodging, those are the uses that fall under lodging. And then at the bottom, you'll see accessory uses. So that's where even though we talk about an accessory dwelling unit as a housing type, which it is, it's also an accessory use that's on another lot that already has, a principal use on it. So that's meant to just help us understand what you have today in your current zoning ordinance. And then, and maybe this is just for me, but in actually using the zoning ordinance, it took me a while to realize that some of the districts actually don't appear on this table when you look at it printed, which I think is the same on the website. But so all we did as a handout for you is, this is the table that's in the zoning ordinance with all the dimensional standards. And it is pretty wide, so, I think you probably received it as, maybe you didn't get it as 11 by 17.
No,
but-
we put it all on one page.
Yeah, yeah. It all fits on
I
one
didn't
page.
expect anyone to actually read that.
Keys for them, it sees.
So that's, again, this is going to change with this project, how we handle dimensional standards. At least for residential uses, we don't know what that's going to look like yet, but this is the information that we're going to update or amend. So, and then this is what's on there. So for residential, the things that you have standards for today are building height, building width, minimum, and then the lot standards of width, depth, area per dwelling, lot coverage, and then setbacks. And you have some, the typical front, side corner, side, interior, rear, and then these 2 standards that are relating to anything next to a residential district, basically needs to be 50 feet away. So that's what we have, or you have today. And you have a zoning map. I think we're just talking about the R1, the R2, and the RCN. But, that can be part of the conversation if we think if there's other districts that we want to talk about, especially if we start talking about some of the mixed-use districts allowing residential. We might need to talk about them.
I suspect when we get to the where question, and we kind of just forget about this map for a second, we'll find ourselves talking about most of those zones. So, although the language we might write might live in a residential section of the zoning ordinance, I suspect we'll be considering changes to this map too based on this process.
All right. Existing residential scale and character, just how to think about that. So what I'm seeing, and when I get through these two slides, I want to see if you want to add anything to this, but when you look at what the character is of the residential areas today in Grand Marais, and we did bring an aerial map with lots. It's hard to see it from where you're at, but if you go up to it, you can see how what the lot character is today. So what I'm seeing is that, Grand Marais has a street grid and block pattern. It's a pretty traditional pattern. More specifically, the typical block size for almost every block is 400 by 280, unless it's cut off in some, angled roadway or something. But that's important to know what those dimensions are when you start talking about lot widths and lot depths. As far as alleys, east of 4th Avenue, most blocks, or typical blocks, have north-south alleys. You enter on the north and the south. Now, they may not physically be there or physically used, but they are there in that they're publicly owned right away. So they're platted that way. West of 4th Avenue, and anybody here would know more about why this is than I would, but west of there, that's not typical at all. Lots of blocks don't have alleys, or they have a T alley, which is, you enter from the north or the south, and then it comes out, and there's an end. There's lots that face south or north on those blocks. Otherwise, most houses, or lots of houses in Grand Marais face. Oh, wait. I might have the directions right. East and west? Is
They
it
do face
Yeah.
east and west, yeah.
Yeah, yeah, east and west.
Although they all face southeast pretty much at some
Yeah,
point, right?
yeah. As far as lots today, most lots are oriented east-west. Oh, I already have it on here, so it must be right. Typical lot depth, because of that 280 width, is 135 to 140. So that's good to know, because why have other numbers if you know the typical block should be this? T alley blocks have, so those lots that are on the end, so for whatever reason, along 3rd Street is where a lot of these T alleys are. So those lots that are at the south or north end of those blocks, they're actually only 100 feet deep. So that's just understanding what you have. And then if you look at, you scan those blocks, most blocks have a mix of lot sizes. So even though the standard is minimum 75 feet, most blocks you look at, there's a variety of sizes. Another thing about character is, what is the front setbacks of houses? Are they typically close to the street? Or are they set back? Are they 25 feet typically, because that's the minimum in the code right now? Or do they vary? And that's really more of a question, and I haven't analyzed that. So I think that's something we should at least talk about and see what our understanding of that is. Garages, are they, well, number one, do most houses have garages or not? And if they do, are they typically detached or attached? Are they behind the house? Whatever, how do they work on the properties usually? And then front entries is something that can be a character type. Some cities, porches are really important, and you want houses to kind of, if they can have porches, that's great. Or, are they up above the grade of the street or the sidewalk, so that's kind of a common thing. I don't know if that's going to be a huge thing for our discussion, but it could be. So that's kind of the list of things that I've seen. So one of the questions is, are there other ways you would describe the existing character of Grand Marais housing residential areas that you think should be on this list, I guess?
I think structure size is something that is important to the character.
And do we have that? I know, I probably asked you this before. Do we have that?
I
Is
think
that
we've
from the
got
county?
square footage from the county.
Yeah.
Yeah. But we don't have a record of heights for buildings. But if we're just thinking about this anecdotally, and you know there are places where there's a lot of very small buildings.
Yeah.
And you know there are places where there's some pretty big ones too. One of the things I've thought about with this process is visualizing how these changes might occur. So when we look at these building types and we've got pictures of them and we've got some just other visualizations of how they might fit on a lot. But something else to consider is, well, what about what our existing regulations already allow? If you were to maximize the allowed build out on our properties, it would look, probably a lot scarier than some of those things are gonna look to some people. And that's probably an important part of this conversation, is just to keep in mind, we're not talking about changing the size we already allow of buildings. What we're talking about is changing the rules so that it's more likely that somebody might take advantage of those things, but they could right now if they really wanted to.
Anything, other things you would think about as far as lots or building, or houses? And the character
I
of
think
them?
one of the things that has always struck me about Grand Marais is that, you have parts of the city that were developed at different times that have distinctly different characteristics. You think that kind of core area between Broadway and maybe Second or Third Avenue West, which has a lot smaller lots, a lot higher density, older homes mixed in with some larger homes, but most of that area was developed prior to the city having any zoning regulations, so you have just a lot of variety. Then you have the areas more to the east side of town that some still have gravel streets. There's a different feel to that part of town. And then you have the area kind of to the west of 8th Avenue West that is newer development and has a complete different feel from the areas that would be in the center or even to the east side of town. So you have some kind of distinctly different feels to different neighborhoods. And I think that's a good thing, that we have differences and that it's not all the same cookie cutter type approach.
We haven't built an apartment building for over 50 years here in town. One of the reasons being the cost is so prohibitive with all the regulations that you have to use, it doesn't work out.
That's one of the
The
challenges.
county's doing a real evaluation of the property tax issue in regards to definitions of resorts, vacation rentals, and Jim Boyd and Linda Jurek are in charge of taking your opinions. If you got any opinions that you're concerned about that proposed state issue, you should contact them. They're in negotiations with a proposal to kind of soften up the short-term rental definitions and so forth. But it's a very serious issue because it's gonna cost, if it goes through, it's gonna cost taxpayers a lot of money, and some will benefit and some will lose. And the only statutory thing the state's got on far as definitions is valuations between 90% and 105 of appraisals. But other than that, their regulations are ignored by different communities in the state. So there's a lot of issues that's going in, and the chamber's on top of it, because it is a serious tax issue. Our taxes are high enough as they are, and if this goes through the way they're proposing, they're gonna be higher. And,
Well, I think the objective here is to try to create standards that would try to alleviate some of the issues that, you know, are causing housing,
that's,
you know, housing to be such a
Yeah,
high
that's true.
cost. You know, I mean, if we can look at
but when you're
changes
dealing
in
with
density.
resorts, the definition of resorts is very confusing on the tax issue from the county.
Yeah,
I'm not complaining, I just thought bringing it up that we should probably be watching that pretty closely. Because it is a big issue.
Yeah, and I mean, for this project, we actually use that tax classification data to do a lot of the mapping, so it's good information for that too. Well, we can come back to this as we get into potential housing types, and I think other thoughts might come up. So potential residential building types. Here's how I would describe the general approach. It's focusing on building forms or the character of the development of the housing first, instead of uses and densities. So a lot of codes that were developed whenever, and yours included, really focus on uses, and sometimes they're oversimplified. It's just single family, multifamily, or but it's use based, and then densities. So it's all about lot sizes, and sometimes it's floor area ratio, but setbacks, all those things. And to Mike's point, which we're probably going to do this in the next phase, if we just illustrated what you could build with your current dimensional standards, you might not like it. But that's how density works. Is it says you can only go up to this. You have to at least do this, or you can't go above this. The way we want to think about it is be clear about the mix of housing types that are allowed. So that's why we're talking about more types, not just single family, multifamily, and not knowing what they are or what they could look like. Regulations are intended to ensure complementary development of a mix of housing types. I think that goes to your comments about there is a variety today. That's a good thing, and we should figure out how to allow more of that. That's hard when, for instance, the lot width is 75 foot for every type of housing that's going to be built. It's not differentiating at all. And then lastly, uses and densities will still be standards in the zoning ordinance, but there really will be a result from the desired, oh wow, I doubled up on the desired, huh? But result from the desired residential building types. What's that?
More desires.
It's really about what you want, right? Desired.
Yes.
So it's not that you would be getting rid of uses and densities, but they'll be informed by what type of housing you want and what form you would like to have people build, or are regulating people to build. So with that, you got some handouts, and we'll start to go into these. So the last time I was here, we had boards that showed housing types. They've changed from that because now we have to get more specific about it. So sometimes people talk about senior housing as a housing type. Well, it could be a housing type, but it's also, it wouldn't have to be senior housing. Senior housing is, in a lot of ways, it's apartments with some other facilities. So, we can talk about that, and if you feel like senior housing has to be its own type, that can be added to the list. But here's what we're laying out as proposed or potentials to start with, is that there's two types of detached houses. I think we might go away from this here. We'll see, but there's the average house that you have today, because you have the minimum lot size of 10,000 square feet and the width of 75 feet, I would say that's an average house size could be built on that. To really attract smaller houses, you would want to have a smaller lot width and probably a smaller lot area minimums. And so that's what we're talking about when we talk about smaller houses, narrower lots, smaller areas. As we get into it, I think you brought up, you do have smaller houses. And some of those houses probably could be on those small lots already. So we'll just have to figure out if you need to have two types for detached houses. Detached courtyard houses. So I'm gonna hand this, well, actually, you have this handout. Maybe we can use this. Too many things going on. Let me open up. Patrick, I might need your help to see. There we go. So you have this handout. We'll just walk through this quickly. So what we're laying out at a high level is detached average, detached small, and what we're looking at across the columns is what is the scale of these housing types? Are they detached or attached? What kind of entry do they typically have? Typical number of units, and then as information, are they allowed? Does it seem like they're allowed in the current code? So, you can go across and see that the houses, I'll just keep going down. We clustered together detached courtyard houses and tiny houses, or tiny house village, and then manufactured home parks. Because those three types are really still detached houses. They're just smaller, typically. And typically to build them, you wouldn't have to do this, but cities are looking at these three typically as clusters of them. So, this courtyard house concept that we've been looking at is typically 3 to 9 units is how cities are looking at it. Tiny house village, that's kind of a newer concept, but it's typically the same idea, but they're really tiny houses. Now, the code we can talk about, the code could allow a tiny house individually too, on a much smaller lot, if that's what we think would be helpful to Grand Marais. And then manufactured home parks, as you know, traditionally they've been clusters of mobile homes or manufactured homes. And your code today has a minimum size for both the park and then for each lot or space. So we're going to be looking at that. Then the next one is accessory dwelling unit. So like I said earlier, that's an accessory structure. They can be detached or attached, so they can be attached to a regular house. They can be they could be within a house. They can be an upstairs, unit or a basement unit, or they can be detached completely, or attached to a garage. So there's lots of different ways to look at that, but they're usually one per lot is the way they're regulated. A duplex, the scale of it to think about is it can be the scale of a large house. So even though people think of it as being something different, the scale of it can still be that it looks like a house, and you may know that here or in other cities. I mean, where I live, if you walk down the street, a lot of times you don't know that it's a duplex or think about it as a duplex. It looks just like maybe a bit bigger house, but sometimes smaller than the biggest house on the block. So the way we're talking about it on this table is that it's the scale of a large house, but they're attached units. You permit them today. It's 2 per lot. Multiplex small. Multiplex doesn't have to be the word that we use in the code, but that's the term we'll start with. That's 3 to 6 units typically. Again, it can be, from the street, it can look like a large house. Doesn't have to be taller than the houses on the block. The width of it can maybe be somewhat wider, but it's probably just gonna be deeper, which if you're walking or live across from it, that's not gonna affect you as much as if it was a really wide building. So attached housing, the type of entry we have on here, shared or individual, but facing the front street, 3 to 6 units. As you go through here, we get into row houses. Row houses are different in that, by definition, they're on their own lots. So even though they're attached, they have their own lots. So there's no side setbacks, basically. And, what we're seeing is cities typically break them down into small and large row house building types. So small being 2 to 4 units. So, that's, if they're, we have the typical widths, if they're 18 to, I think, 24 feet, it doesn't get that wide, really, if you do 2 or 4 units in a row. And so that might fit in better than a large row house, which we're saying is 5 to 8 units. But, again, they could be 2 stories tall, just like a house on the same block. And the fact that they're, 2 to 4 or 5 to 8 units and they're attached doesn't mean they have to be overwhelming to the street or anything in height. And they can be differentiated from unit to unit, so they just, they might fit in really well in the block. Multiplex large is defined as, bigger than the small version of that, so 7 to 18 units is kind of a typical range. And starting with the row house large and then this multiplex large, and I'll show you this on this handout that I have in a minute. They're starting to need more space, and so they are bigger than what a house looks like, even a large house, and they take a bigger spot on the block. So you have to start to think about, can they fit in on every block, everywhere in the neighborhood, or do you think they don't? They should be in more select areas. And then lastly, apartments, courtyard apartments, whatever we want to call them long-term. The idea is that they're apartment buildings, but they don't have to be tall. So they could be 2 stories, 3 stories, or, we can say that they could be 4 stories if we want to. But that would go above the 35 feet height, so we'd need to talk about height in that sense, in that case. And then the last two, so the intent of this table is to try to identify pretty much all the typical residential building types that cities look at. So the ones at the bottom are called live, work, and then Main Street mixed use. And these are terms that, they can be whatever they should be in Grand Marais. But the idea with the live, work is that these are buildings that have a non-residential component. So, that live, work, it could be an office and somebody lives above it typically, or it could be an art studio and somebody lives above it. But typically on that lot, the 2 units are owned by the same person. So the reason it's separated out is that it's a non-residential use and then it has work. And then the last one is a mixed-use residential type, which, we can call it Main Street mixed use. You already allow this in your downtown area and your mixed-use districts. In fact, I think that's all you allow for residential in your downtown, for sure. I'm not sure, I haven't looked at the other mixed-use districts as much. So the intent of this table is to give you a tool to think about all the residential types that could be considered as types in Grand Marais zoning ordinance. And, you may want all of these or some of these. So that's kind of the goal, is to figure out which of these we think we need to look at closer, and it should go into the zoning ordinance as residential building types.
Should we react to that right now?
Yeah, I know. Yeah, I think we should.
Thoughts? Any?
First reaction, I don't like the large row house.
Yeah, when you see all these different options and possibilities, you know, I mean, I wonder, you know, because we've had such a struggle to see any kind of development other than really traditional homes, how these would come to be. I mean, who's gonna step up to make some of these other possibilities happen? We can designate it by ordinance, but that doesn't mean it's gonna work. It's gonna
Yeah.
happen. I mean,
There needs to be a mix of, we allow it, there's a place where it makes sense, and there's somebody who's got the means and the desire to actually do it.
yeah.
That's a good thing to consider as we're looking at this. And the way that it might inform the strategy is really to focus on all of the smaller uses first. So I think one of the problems we would have, even if we didn't have an objection to the form of some of the larger uses, is there just isn't a place where you could imagine them being built. You know, whereas if our neighborhoods are gonna incrementally get more housing units in them, it's much more likely that what used to be a single-family lot is gonna have 2 or 3 units on it, rather than a block is going to have 40 units on it.
Right.
And are these building types, forms, going to matter depending on if you're hooked up to city sewer and water or not?
Well, it's an issue, certainly, utilities, and the ability to develop high-density, uses is gonna be pretty much dependent on having access to city sewer and water.
Yeah, our plan now says, no, we don't care about the form of the building, but we do care about how much space it takes on a property, because we need to use that property to deal with those issues.
Well, and the standards are much larger if
Yeah.
you're not on utilities.
But given the fact that we don't have any expertise in dealing with it, I think it'd be a mistake for us to make it easier for people to build big buildings that aren't connected to municipal utilities. You know, a 40-unit apartment building that's got septics might be, I mean, it's not uncommon even to have that, but for us to be able to effectively regulate it would be difficult.
Yeah, so today the minimum lot width is 200 feet if you're not on utilities.
Yeah. So I think probably we want to focus on just the utilities areas.
Yeah, and I think when we start to talk about affordability too, when you start to talk about individual wells and septics, then you start to, that whole concept of affordability starts to crumble, because right away up front you have that investment plus the land costs, and then you start to build whatever you build, even if it's a small place, you know, you have this huge,
Outlay
Yeah.
right there.
you know,
Yeah.
I mean, that's the value of being on city utilities, is that you have the ability to not have that capital outlay to begin with. I mean, you have a cost of putting in the hookup, but not the cost of building a septic system or drilling a well. And
And then maintenance, too, after you've.
I mean, you're gonna pay for it, I
Yeah.
mean, in the long run, by paying your utility bill, but
Yeah.
you're not gonna have that upfront cost to, you know, I mean, that's what I think creates a problem for a lot of people, is that they
Yeah.
just don't have the resources to bear that burden.
To keep utilities affordable, the strategy is for these new units to be put on existing stuff,
Yeah.
Yes.
that we share
We
those
have made
costs with the larger
decisions
group.
on 8th Avenue, that small house there is up and operating fine. And, you know, the 10,000 foot requirement is, maybe is too big.
Yeah.
If you're
Yeah.
talking about costing.
Well, you look at the original part of town that was developed,
It was small.
you have homes that are built on 25-foot lots or 40-foot lots.
That's right.
And they're smaller homes, but it's worked. I mean, it's worked. I mean, it's not everybody would want to be
Right.
on a small lot, but I don't think we're saying you have to do that, but we're giving you an option to be able to consider
But we can,
development.
we can make an exception with those on conditional use, which we did. And it's very successful. The utilities are less, the heat less.
Yeah.
Yeah. So,
Rural housing, used to be very popular in Duluth and all kinds of major cities, and we've never done that here.
right.
We don't even have any townhomes
is,
here.
is Cobblestone Cove downtown.
Right.
The
Those-
past
a lot of those owners
people on the
want that
planning
to be
commission, they didn't want
residential.
condominiums, they put a huge acreage requirement, nobody in the world could build one. So it was a moratorium for 10 years.
Yeah, and so, think about this. Today, well, when we're talking about row house, we're talking about individual lots. Those are actually condominiums, right?
They're individual lots, it's platted. I mean, you call them condominium because that's the way they're operated,
Yeah.
is the way people
Yeah, okay,
understand that
okay.
word to be, but
Yeah,
I say townhouse, when they're up and down, they own the land underneath. Townhouse.
yeah, well, yeah, that's what I was gonna say, because townhouses or roads, they can be condos on a lot where they don't own, except anything but their building. And you can do it different ways. The way we're talking about it here, row house, you could call it a townhouse, is that it's a separate lot. So one of the things is you'd have to figure out, you'd have to say there's no side setbacks for, attached units like that, which I don't think your code handles today.
not very well. And at a minimum, I think we want to deal with that when it comes to duplexes.
Well, years ago, but
Yeah.
because affordability in New York and San Francisco, because the land was so much that they went into town to wall-to-wall houses. And they worked very, very good, but that's a different idea, and that doesn't go over too well in a lot of people's minds.
Well, I guess I'm just kind of looking at, like, what do I want of these options or not, when we talk about lots, it's really, I think the question isn't it just about density. We don't really have any other land. We're not gonna spread out. I mean, we got all we got. Isn't that fair to say?
Yeah, and I
So-
think
so-
even the question to add on to that is that we have only so much land that has utility service to it.
Okay,
And
so then if you
the ability
narrow
to
it-
extend utilities is a challenge, so that's.
Big one.
Yeah.
So, okay, so again, density is the
There's a
name of our
septic-
game.
Houses in the city of Grand Marais, because the rock can't get to Carl Hansen's house.
So if
Has a well
density,
and septic system.
I mean, if density is the name of the game, then it's all about changing setbacks or how much space between, and like how many houses can you get on a lot? Because I mean, these lots already exist. If you got a house there, can they, add an ADU? So can we make that happen? I mean, isn't that our job? Isn't that the vision that we were trying to do? Is like we just have to increase it. So I mean, in some way, like I don't care what house they can put on. If they want to add an ADU, cool. If they want to add another little small house on a lot that already has a small house, great. To be able to do that, then it's really about setbacks and, isn't that?
You're
Yeah.
right on.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
so what are you asking for us tonight to help you move this along?
So, yeah, so I think, I'll get to those questions. I just wanted to say, yeah, this is a lot of types. It's meant to be all the types that you can think about. The last ones you talked about, Mike said something about the mixed-use districts, maybe some of those we use to affect the mixed-use districts, but not the residential district or districts. But even if you do some of these, like the ADU, when the first time we talked about or we reviewed and then talked about ADUs in your code, I'd said to Mike, well, you allow those, right, by code? And he said, I don't know, do we? And then I looked at it closer.
Not
No,
really.
you don't
Not
really.
really. No.
So, you know, that would be an improvement right there. You know, if you allowed row houses, but only up to 4, because beyond that, it just seems like the scale's not right for Grand Marais. You know, that's a good option too. But even if you don't do that, if you allow courtyard housing so that, you know, those are detached houses. They're just like houses in Grand Marais, but, you know, they're clustered together. They're on a bigger lot. Maybe that's,
But the
maybe that's a big
reality is,
improvement.
like, I don't know, like, you'd have to tear something down to do that. I mean, like, where are you gonna, you know, I mean,
That happens, so let's,
Yeah.
let's give an object.
Well, we approved a row housing on Howard Joines' property,
Well, we didn't.
No.
but
we approved
they
it.
all,
We approved the
everybody
plat.
got mad at it.
We approved.
Yeah,
a-
but
a
that's
sub-
the one I
sub-
would've said, is think about that. So
We
the
approved
top of Fourth
subdivision.
Avenue,
That's all we did.
there was one single-family home on a 45,000 square foot lot, and that home got torn down. And the idea was someone wanted to develop, really, I think, row houses would be a good description of what they wanted to build initially,
Yeah.
which are these connected with zero setback but separately owned pieces of property.
Yeah.
But it just there wasn't a real path forward for that idea.
because of zoning or?
Yeah.
Yeah.
But because we don't have a set of rules that allows a series of buildings to be next to each other with zero lot line setbacks without going through like 8 variances. So,
Our planned unit development standards are inadequate to deal with that kind of a development because
Yeah.
it requires you have a larger tract of land to begin with, which defeats the, well,
Doesn't work.
It complicates.
Doesn't work for Intel very well.
Well, different
And-
places like Edina, they can get away with requiring, because people got a lot of money, but that's not the case up here, or Greenwich, Connecticut. You ought to look at that and see what all they are, 2 or 3 acres per house.
well, you look at the map up there of the city and, you know, where do we have any kind of wealth of vacant land? We don't.
No.
That has utility services to it. I mean, it
Yeah.
doesn't exist.
yeah, so most of the action that these changes are gonna create are gonna be small scale changes.
Yep.
Yeah, so the handout the new handout that you have, I'll go over really quickly. So the way this is, what we're trying to show with this is, I mean, you've seen most of these photos before because we had this at the last meeting in September. But what we did here, and you can take this with you obviously, but this is showing on the tops of these blocks is 400 feet divided by 75-foot minimum width. You can get basically 5 lots if you were gonna subdivide a half block. And then what we're showing on the south side of all these blocks is the numbers that are here. So if the lot width minimum went from 75 to 50 feet, it's showing how many lots you get here. So you can see that if you took 2 of these 75s here, you could get 3 or 4. You know, it starts to show you that you could start breaking things down where there are gaps or where, like Mike said, there's a redevelopment opportunity that comes up over time. And so we did that for all these housing types to show, you know, if you go down to narrow or small lots, and you go down to 50, maybe even 35, or maybe 35s for a tiny house, you know, it's just showing through math how many lots you could get. Just to help you understand that. Detached courtyard houses, we're showing if the minimum width is 100 or 125, you know, how many of those could you get on a block? And not that you would, you know, like for the 125, not that you would do 3 sets of courtyard housing, but it just shows you, if you did one of those, how it would fit next to what you currently allow. And then-
So on those courtyard homes, I mean, just, you're saying that on those 100-foot lots, they could fit on those 100-foot lots? They could fit those six homes on that 100-foot lot?
Yeah, yeah.
Yes.
And what's the square footage of those homes?
That's something that I don't think we've captured yet, but typically they're small.
900 square feet?
Yeah, 9 or
Some-
less even, I think, yeah.
Okay, okay.
Yeah, they're typically small, smaller detached houses, so.
And when you're talking about average and small size detached homes, what kind of square footage are you talking about on those? Any, just a general?
About
idea?
800 to 1,000.
Yeah, I think they're around 1,000.
That's a low income standard.
That's a small one,
Yeah,
is 800 to 1,000?
That's information we would want to get into
Yeah,
as we move to the next step,
Yep.
because, you know, if we're gonna look at what the square footage is of Grand Marais houses today,
mhm.
we'd also want to look at those.
See, the
those
hospital
types.
is interested in doing something, you know. They want to build an apartment building there, but the costs are so prohibitive that they may go into mobile homes behind, you know, where the old emergency, and there's vacant land back there.
Yep.
And the EDA is going to get involved in that.
Where is that,
Right there.
And this is probably not the time to explain that, but I'm just curious, why is that so prohibitive? Is it prohibitive because it's a zoning issue, or what makes building an apartment so prohibitive?
It's a zoning issue.
Okay.
I think it just costs a lot of money to build a big building. I mean, if they've got the space, there's no zoning obstacle.
You know, you got a lot of people up here, there's a lot of $1 million houses around this county. Elisa Rockefeller bought Harry Dravik's place out in Hovland. She tore that big building down, and she's gonna build a multi-million-dollar home there. So you got a diversity here that's a lot different than a lot of counties. And there's nothing wrong with that, but it does exist. And how do you address it? That's what we should be looking at.
And the way I see, talking about that hospital issue, they've got an employee housing issue where they're seriously considering building their own housing. And making some changes like this, maybe that creates 8, 10 new units in the community that they could partner with somebody
Sure.
in a much easier way than building a whole new building.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, like, that's why I think like the tiny home idea is awesome. I think a lot of people would jump on that because Grand Marais was already doing tiny homes.
Well, I mean, not even, those are, what we've got is a lot of these detached small houses, I
Yeah.
think, the way he's described it.
Yeah.
There is someone that built what anyone would typically consider a tiny home, and it seems almost ridiculous because it needs to be connected to municipal sewer, and it's on a 10,000 square foot lot, and it just looks like a garden shed in the middle of the woods, and it's just, you know, that's not taking advantage of that idea in a very useful way.
Right.
And it's not what they really wanted, but that's what our ordinance requires right now.
Yeah.
Well, and I've seen some of these types. I've seen, detached courtyard homes in small communities, and I've seen small houses on small lots.
Yes.
But the question that keeps coming back to me is,
Yeah.
how just by changing or allowing this, how does that make that happen? I mean, we're talking about the zoning issue here.
That's right.
And the zoning isn't the only issue, and by just changing the zoning, are we going to engage this conversation
Don't
to
you-
take it
It's-
one
Of
step
Don't you
the
further?
think
three
it-
things that are required for to have it happen, the available place, the available capital, and the available regulation, we've only got direct control of one.
We have one.
And don't you think if this had been, if we had got this all solved out and all agreed and it's passed, John's property would be developed today?
Yes.
Maybe.
I don't think there's any doubt. He had a concept, if it would have met our rules and he didn't come to our meetings, I think he would have done it.
Let me ask this question, like, I was your neighbor, I look at that house I rented, it's got that big backyard, you could easily put a tiny home there. You could easily put a garage with an apartment, and there's another available rental, like, why?
Yeah.
What's
Yeah.
stopping that? That seems pretty slam dunk to me, is it a zoning issue? It's,
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a zoning issue.
So, like,
Well,
what has
right now, we
happened?
don't even allow that conversation to happen because the zoning stops it dead before you
Yeah.
even.
So again, like, that's where I'm interested, like,
The 10,000
how do we,
That's-
I mean, like, again, because it's really about density, we're not gonna reinvent stuff. We've got
And we're not gonna solve the financing.
lots out here, we've got this we got wacky situations all over where there are pockets of availability. You could put something here, you might do something there, you can maybe do something there, maybe if you tore that down, you could do this, but I mean, like, I really see that's where we're going in some sense.
Yeah.
And so,
Well, we worked on the old Gopher cabins, and that's been very successful for low-income housing. That's what low-income housing is. Because the buildings were already there, all we did was convert them into rental properties.
yeah, and,
To circle back to the hospitals issue, they're not looking for low-income housing. They're looking for pretty good income housing.
Yeah, yeah.
And they
for-
still have trouble.
For our neighborhood anyway.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we need to add just more units in entirety. And so what you're talking about is, that seems like the easiest way to do it, is to just make that simple change that this is now allowed. And so why looking at this is helpful to us in that conversation. Because when we make that change, we also need to think about the density issue and the setback issue and the height issue and the parking issue and all those other things.
What's the
And the
timetable
million different
on
ways
all this?
that might get laid out on somebody's property, these are good ways for us to think about that. So what we're
Yeah.
calling a detached courtyard houses is not a lot different than, I've already got a single-family house and a cabin in the back, and I want to add another one.
Yeah,
And so
sure.
what are the rules going to be, like, so that, how much of my property can I cover? And, do we care about height in a different way if you've got 6 buildings instead of 1? Well, how do you deal with parking? Maybe we don't care about parking after a certain number of units, or maybe we need to make sure there's a garage with this many spaces. Or, we've got to kind of figure that out for how do we add density to our existing lots. And so this is a good way for us to kind of categorize that, but it's going to circle back to, I hope anyway, a few simple changes to the ordinance that just suddenly make that easier, or at
Yeah, I
least
think,
more understandable.
I think back to a meeting that was, a year and a half, maybe even 2 years ago now, down at North House about affordable housing, and brought all players together, people that were interested in the issue from every different perspective. And, I feel like we're in a vacuum here, though, doing this, trying to make some decisions about how to encourage something to happen, but yet we're not talking to the people that might be the ones that can help
Make
us,
that happen.
help us.
Isn't that next month?
Yeah,
Well,
yeah,
I
so,
think the EDA could help us.
yeah, so,
If you get down to the final stages of this, the EDA has done a lot in the last year and a half for housing, with the one-roof housing on Second Street, and we're moving in the right direction. But it's low-income housing is very difficult to obtain without a subsidy.
Right.
And years ago, I worked on a plan where the FHA paid for 20% of the cost for if they qualified for low-income housing. But that's all thrown out now. But that, probably the only real way you're ever gonna get it done.
Yeah, and I think
Huh?
we're talking about more housing at this point, period. Not necessarily low-income housing. We're just talking more.
Yeah, I appreciate your little drawings here. That helps me immensely.
yeah, so we can talk about those more too, but just so that it seems like we're going in the direction you want to go. These are the questions I think we're trying to answer tonight, and not definitively, but, what building types should be allowed in Grand Marais zoning ordinance, I guess is what it should say. Along with that, what concerns should be addressed with specific standards for some, because there might be some that you think, I think you brought up large row houses, don't seem like a good fit. But maybe there's a type that you like, but you think, my concern about it is this, and if we can start to identify those, then we can say, well, here's a standard that would prevent that issue from happening, so.
So I want to be clear that that was just my first reaction.
Yeah.
I really don't want to limit anything right now.
Here.
So my next
All right.
question,
Zoning.
my next question though is, okay,
I'm for it.
what are
Why
the
not?
setbacks we're going to put on each one of these things, and how much of the lot can they cover?
Yeah.
So,
And I think that a lot of that has to do with where, because,
Exactly.
you could take, you can't take a Grand Marais condominiums type building and put it right in the midst of a developed residential area and have that fit. I mean, it's just not gonna work.
Isn't that what they did?
Yeah, they did.
Well-
They did.
Anymore.
Anymore.
You've already got a subsidized housing in the middle of a residential neighborhood.
All on the same block though, not mixed in with the.
Same block,
with the
yeah, but it was
residential.
done.
Yeah, and I don't mean to be flippant about that. I want to push back on that because I think we need to assume that if we allow these things, and maybe even encourage these things, that might happen. That an existing developed with an existing character
It's almost
suddenly
50 years ago
includes
that one.
a
I worked
new
on that with
idea.
Janet Hanson.
But isn't that where our design
Yeah.
standards come in then? That
our
Yeah.
setback requirements, our
So,
dimensional requirements.
I'm ready to move there.
I mean, yeah, I mean, I think that's it. I mean, if
Well-
you look at if you just consider just simple zoning of setbacks and whatnot, and then maybe in that particular space, hey, I could do this house, or maybe in this particular space, I could do this form, as long as you have the room.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, yeah, there's a lot to figure out, I feel like, too. The third question is where generally should each building type be allowed? So to your point, versus, well, which types do we think we want? But where do they go? And then you have to think about the standards. So I think the order that we're trying to do it is, first, generally, which of these housing types we think you should keep moving along with? Not saying these are the ones we're gonna use, these are the ones we don't like. I don't think we need to figure that out yet. To go back to your point, maybe I have my slides all in the wrong order, but, community engagement, the plan is that we would facilitate an online survey, could be a paper survey as well, to gauge the community's level of support and concerns for these potential building types. I'm looking for ideas for type of community input that you want in that survey. Of course, we'd have to have information available. We don't want to overwhelm regular people with, tables and all that necessarily, but the idea was, after tonight's meeting, one of the next steps was to have an online survey, and it can be a paper survey at City Hall or wherever, that people can say, I like this, I don't like this, I have concerns about this. I know you've done online surveys here, I mean, you can.
It's hard for me to still imagine how we're going to frame these questions for the public. What I don't want to do is ask people technical questions about zoning rules.
Right.
What should the setback be?
Right.
Usually it's even
No.
a technical
Yeah.
question about
No.
zoning rule. And it's almost more like we need to get impressions about visual representations of density and reactions to. And so it might be really hard to get super easily quantifiable feedback from a survey. I'm not sure yet what the right question is to ask.
Yeah, well, and-
I want to share this type of information with people as kind of a pushing out of information to get conversation flowing. But I would hate to ask the general public to react to these specific housing types and say, which ones do you want us to have in Grand Marais? 'Cause
Yeah.
I think that
That
would
would
just
not
go
go over
badly.
well.
I don't think
Yeah.
anybody at this table would have a consensus.
No, it's a complex question that kind of feedback's going to be hard to get. Having a focus group where we grabbed, like that group that came here and worked with us originally about housing and
I
said,
think
okay,
that's a
here's
good
our
idea.
housing types. Let's talk about some standards. But I think we really need to develop some model standards for them to look at and react to before that would work.
One thing that you said earlier that was interesting to me was just, obviously we're talking about density in area where we have city water, city sewer.
Mhm.
So how does that play a part? Like how much of a lot, if this is a lot and I have a house on it, like how much do I need, how much space do I really have to have on that lot dedicated to city water and city sewer?
None.
None.
I mean,
10
there's plenty.
feet.
There are places downtown where the building goes lot line to lot line, and they're connected to municipal water and sewer. So it's brought to the property in the right of way. They connect to it
Got
in the
it.
right of way, and then whatever is underneath the building is how they're doing it.
Okay.
So you're asking about lot coverage?
I guess, yeah.
If when
Yeah,
there's
so today-
separate buildings and there's separate ownership, we start to get a little nervous about utilities suddenly. You know, we don't want to see a lot of situations where there's 6 different buildings on what used to be a lot, and they all used to be owned by one person, so they're all connected through House A, and now they're owned by multiple different people, and they don't even know where the pipes are, and that's when problems start to occur.
So in a sense like that, like the detached courtyard houses, that could be a problem because you've got 6
Yeah.
houses on a lot and they're all individually owned, and who controls the septic?
You know, if there's a space then that's dedicated like that drawing, kind of showing right up the middle, that you could manage that, where they could all connect in the middle and run out to the street. I think there's a way to figure that out. If we're talking about row houses again, they can each have their individual connection to the street.
Okay, that's easy.
I mean, all of these are commonly done
Okay.
with municipal utilities, so that's not an issue
Okay.
to extend those, you know, as long as it's understood that if you have these separate units, that they need separate services, it's not all gonna be running through a loop through each one.
Right.
You know.
Yeah, but the lot coverage standard also today is 30% and or 25%.
Yeah.
So
You're
You know-
saying that you can only cover 30% of,
that's the maximum. So
yeah.
so
I
that's
think
one of those.
crazy.
But think
that's
about
one
a
of those-
10,000 square foot lot. That means that the house can have a 3,000 square
Yeah.
foot footprint. That's enormous.
Mm-hmm.
There's
Yeah.
not many of those in town.
Yeah.
Right. Well,
So-
and exactly.
And if there are-
exactly.
and if
I
there
mean,
are-
that's what we're talking about. That's what's so screwed up about
Yeah.
that.
And
It's like
generally-
nobody could afford to build that.
Well, or if they
Or-
do,
or buy it.
or they have more than a 10,000 square foot lot, then generally too, so.
Right.
you know.
Sure. Yeah.
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 So you know, in that hierarchy of how you
I've got
make
3,600
decisions,
feet in my house.
you know, again,
Yeah,
first
but
it's which
how
of
many
these housing
floors?
types
2.5
do you
stories.
think
Yeah.
are of
Yeah.
interest to Grand Marais? Then I think
And
it's
how many square
getting
feet
into
is
the
your lot?
standards,
Huh?
How many
but
square
it's even
feet
the
is your
types of
lot?
standards.
That's probably
Lot coverage,
It's
some cities don't even
10,000.
have a maximum
More
lot
than that.
coverage.
Is it not?
Some
more
cities
than 10,000, I'm sure.
Probably more.
don't focus much on, as much on area of the lot.
120
It's really
six
about the width,
frontage
which,
by-
you know, the
300.
reason we talked about the character of the blocks is if the code is really advocating for typical blocks, the depth of lots is 140.
But
You
the
don't need
house
the
takes
area
up
anymore,
most
you
of
just
it.
need the
There
width,
isn't
because
much
the depth is
yard.
given,
Right.
Yeah.
basically, so,
Okay.
And you don't care about lot coverage, you care about setback.
Oh, I
Right.
gotta get,
right. So
Moving
there's
it.
that discussion too, before you get to the setback should be 25 or 15 or, you know, because, I mean, we're talking about reducing lot width, but you could, I mean, just 25 feet in front of the house, that, I don't know, if that's the right number. It might be, because maybe you feel like that's kind of the character of the neighborhoods, you don't want to get it any closer. But, you know, in a
It's
smaller
smaller.
lot, you might say, well, 20 feet or 15 feet's enough.
And it
It's
might
just
I
be
want to
tricky
know
because
what we currently have, so you're gonna work on that?
No, but if you want us to,
We go out
I mean,
with
now
a tape
take
measure.
the actual.
That's,
Well,
that's
no, we
not
can
easy
do it
to get.
online. You know, we've
Yeah.
got pretty good imagery, but it would be an effort.
it's just tricky because it's so, in some ways, it always, to me, seems so irregular. You know, as you're saying that,
Right.
I'm envisioning this house, like, well, that's way that one. This one's practically on the sidewalk. I mean, it's just so irregular, like, that's almost like our norm. So how do you work within,
Well,
you
and
know?
that's where maybe you have a shorter minimum,
Yeah.
and they
people
can
can go
decide,
back
they
as
can
far
go
as
back
they
far,
want. Yeah,
farther if they want a
absolutely.
bigger
Yeah.
front
Yeah.
yard, or maybe.
Or another option is you can say, if you're gonna go in between houses and redevelop, or it's a gap, you use the average of the block, and, you know, you have flexibility, it doesn't have to be this number.
Oh.
It's
that's
fit the
okay.
character of that block.
Or maybe a porch can be closer to the street.
That can go
than-
closer,
Than
right.
the front
Front
front of the house, so you're not,
Right.
you know, so you have kind of still a buffer between.
Yeah.
the- You know, kind of, yeah.
So in some way, I think about this, and I just, because of all this irregularity, and because of all of these, so like, maybe you have these just very minimum setbacks, and people can adjust and go back as far as they want. But I guess, you know, you just set it up that way, and then you build how it works within. So then what I wanna hear is like how people would take advantage of that, or how that
Yeah.
would
Well, take advantage of that. That's what we would want them to do if we made
Yeah.
that change, right? So that's not the bad way. But how are people going to react negatively to that? Might be a different question to ask. You know, if your neighbor's house suddenly gets 15 feet closer to you than it was before, you're going to feel an encroachment on your space, even if it wasn't your space, right?
Right.
You take advantage of that. That's the conversation we had about the Joins property too. All those neighbors on the west feel that open space that they don't own.
Mm-hmm.
And when it becomes developed, suddenly it's gone and they really feel its loss. And that's what we'll have to deal with if we change our setback requirements and now buildings can be 5 feet from the side yard lot line is, well, we're gonna have some houses 10 feet away from each other. And if you were there first, that's gonna feel like an imposition.
Mm-hmm.
I've already talked to people who are very concerned about that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The change in setbacks.
Mhm.
Yeah. I mean, at first look, I would say your setbacks are reasonable. They're not like
Go ahead.
glaring that they should be reduced.
We
I think there's opportunities for it, but.
the Halverson's house on 8th Avenue, so between 2nd and 3rd Street, I think, on the west side of 8th Avenue.
Mm-hmm.
They built on a lot that was undersized, and they got a variance from us to build on it. It wasn't 75 feet wide, it's 50 feet wide, I think.
65, I think it was.
But they didn't ask for a variance from the setbacks. They were able to meet the setback requirements on a smaller lot. So even if you've got, 10 foot on the side setbacks on a 50-foot lot, you can still have a 30-foot wide building.
That seems pretty large.
That's, my house is, 30 feet by 50-some feet.
So
So it's a pretty big
it
house,
still
and
could
it's
fit.
within the 30-foot, it's under 30 feet wide.
Yeah.
Okay, cool, that makes sense to me.
Mhm.
So then the next question is like, how do you, like, how small can we make lots?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like if we're gonna go with density, how can we?
Right, and I think that's what we're looking at here, like we can see what we'd get with 35 feet. And that is
It's
a lot
35
of
feet.
housing on a block all of a sudden. I mean,
That's pretty small, 35
Yeah.
feet.
Oh, no, yeah.
That
It's, it's.
And those aren't
They may
10-foot
not
setbacks.
be-
Yeah,
What's that?
that
What's
couldn't
that?
be.
That's not a 10-foot
no,
setback.
no, for sure not.
Well, if you did the tiny house, concept where you put in a 12-foot wide, or even a 10-foot wide structure on a 30-foot, 5-foot lot, you can get the 10-foot setback, but
Yeah.
We have to be ready to accept some compromise here too. Even though there will be people concerned about this, we can't add density without making people concerned.
Oh, I
And so
agree.
there has to be
Yeah.
a willingness as a community to accept some change that, that thing I don't want really closer to me. But if we're gonna come together as a community to solve this housing issue, I'm gonna just have to be able to live with that.
Yeah.
Well, and I think protecting the character of the community, you don't want to, by adopting a new ordinance, completely change what has existed here for, a long time and existed pretty harmoniously.
Right.
Yes.
Well,
So, yeah, so these are,
pretty harmonious.
I've tried, well, I guess these boards don't say, these aren't recommended. These are potential, so,
Yeah.
when you bring up like the 50 and the 35, what we're saying is, based on our research, small detached house lots, cities look at 50, some go down to 35. I mean, I know an example in a suburb of the Twin Cities that got down to, I think they got down to 30 in a development, and they said that was too small. 40, I think they're comfortable with. But, for Grand Marais, if you went from 75 to 50, I mean, that's a big change. I mean, I don't think you need to think, oh, about 35. I mean, if you go to 60, those are changes.
Significant numbers, yeah.
But it starts, I mean, by laying them out in the lots, it starts to help you think about, does that get you a couple more lots per half block, or one, or three, whatever?
Yeah.
Because it's a math game at some point. That's why
Right.
knowing blocks are 400 by 280 helps
Mhm.
to work with the numbers.
Yeah.
So I'm not sure how much time we want to spend tonight, but I think in my mind, we were gonna try to get to what are the housing types that we keep moving forward with? Not that we're recommending them yet, but that we don't take them off the list, and then we dig into them deeper. And then what are those standards that we need more information about? You know, in our original scope, we talked about going out to the community early, not that we couldn't wait and do it later.
You
when we
keep
have more
coming back
information.
to this, and you know, I just, the logic of it seems strange to me, though, you know, it's like, we want these house types, so how do we create zoning that fit them, instead of like, how do we create possible land use, and then you decide what kind of houses fit in there? I mean,
Well, we are gonna do that. I mean, that's, the second step is
maybe I'm just.
to visualize
stuck in
where
my
we fit it in.
ways.
I don't know, Mike, what your thought is on that.
I've got some of the same confusion about that. I don't necessarily want to end up with a long list of housing types in the ordinance. So I like to use it as a way to think about
How would I use this
the
land?
simplified dimensional standards
Yeah.
that might result in these housing types being built. But I don't know that I want to codify these housing types.
No, but we want to use.
We want to use them to think about the
to
issues.
think about
that-
it and create our
Yeah.
guidelines that allow us
So,
to.
having said that, and you know,
follow.
after Stacy kind of qualified her earlier comment, I'm not sure there's any of these that we should take off the list for further development at this point.
No.
I think, yeah, I mean, it's not like I
Okay.
go to the public and say, like, hey, we're thinking about trying to add these types and add these types. It's like, we're trying to create zoning that creates opportunity.
Yeah.
Yep, that's creating opportunity.
And
for
we're looking at these
development.
types as a way to understand what the possible consequences of these changes might be.
Yeah.
And what rules we need to put in place to make sure that it is acceptable to us.
Yeah.
Well, and I think we have two different types of things we're residential, we're talking about. One is the kind of the individual home, and the other is the larger apartment or row house or complex of some sort, which an individual isn't gonna build. You know, I mean, an individual contractor might do that, or a developer might do that, but when you're talking about a single-family home or a duplex that somebody might build, it's.
I've had that conversation. You'd be surprised how many folks, when they're looking at a single-family home that's maybe a little undersized and they're trying to figure out what's next with it, and they might want it to be a duplex or a triplex, and trying to think about how to make that incremental step. And that's, again, like that, it's not the either a single-family home or a 12-unit apartment. It's the right after the single-family home where I think the action is for us.
Yeah.
The,
Yeah,
how do I
I would agree.
get 2 or 3 units, or maybe 4 units onto a lot?
Well,
And
that-
something that somebody that owns a house that's already got it a garage, and they might, you know, they might have added a unit, and now they're comfortable with that, and they want to add another one, or something like that.
Yeah, that accessory residential unit that, you know.
And let's think about Sambo's house, for instance,
Mhm.
which he's got 3 units in there, I think, maybe now, but it's like, that could be a single-family home, nobody know the difference, but the fact is, they've cut it up into apartment here,
Yes.
and that's the sort of thing that we want to make easier, or at least show the path to people for, that right now our ordinance doesn't really allow for. So it's not just building new, it's also reusing existing.
Yeah, yeah.
And I think there is some appetite for investing in existing and expanding it a little bit.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And especially in the residential district, you know, that's.
And we
something-
also, and I think, we've also, and this is, in previous meetings, we talked about, and I think it was when you were here, Mr. Miller, you were, like, we have this R1 and this R2, and this R2 is so weird, and why don't we all just call it R1? I mean, like, there can be, and I think that in some of your presentations, you know, like, let's go down an imaginary street. Here's a single dwelling, here's a duplex, here's 3 row houses, like, you know, and it all sort of blends harmoniously together, you know, so, I mean, I think that's,
And we kind of have that now. I mean,
And that's- yeah, that's
duplexes
our
are
reality.
Scattered throughout town.
that's
you
the
know.
reality.
Even just look at our block and think about what's going on there.
Mhm.
I mean, we got my house, Maria's, which was a duplex and isn't, and yours, and
Which
then
was a
there's
duplex and.
yeah, and across the street is a 6-unit bed and breakfast, and
Right.
another single-family home that could really be 3 rentals if they wanted it to be, and,
Yeah.
and a bunch of little. I mean, it's just like this is already. We're so mixed up. And we're so small. I'd have a hard time drawing borders around.
Right.
When we get to that question of
Right.
where do we want these things to exist?
Wherever they
It's like,
fit.
gosh, wherever,
Wherever
yeah,
they-
if,
yeah.
if you can meet the setback and height requirements and you think you can sell it or rent it, go for it.
Well, see, I think that's where we end up with the challenges with convincing the neighbors that are already there that they want to open up their arms to see something different than occurring, because I think that's where the challenge is going to be.
Yeah, I think we need to tackle it head on. So the way I've been thinking about that, in this next step, when we do want to start really getting out and talking to people about this, is if those of you that have been through the Blandon process, they call it a framing statement. So you start with the idea that here's the goal that we're trying to get to, or the issue that we all agree is the issue. And we need to keep that front and center. Like, every time we're talking about this, we really don't care about the minutia of should it be 8 feet or 10 feet, right? That it's important to us in the extent that we want to make sure we don't create problems solving the first issue, but it always has to come back to that. Like, this is what we're trying to do, is add more housing. So we're not trying to protect that 10-foot buffer between you and your neighbor. That's not the issue. That, this is the issue, add more housing. And whenever people bring us a response to that, we have to get to understand that maybe we don't agree about this initial issue, or maybe we do, and then they're willing to accept a little hardship to help us get there.
Mhm. Yep.
Yeah, and I was trying to get at that statement of the first thing about reducing barriers to get more housing, but maybe it's even simpler, it's get more housing.
Get more housing, yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
this is what we can do to do it. So-
But it's, I don't think it's get more housing at all cost. It's get more housing that is appropriately designed and situated so that it makes the community still feel.
Yeah, absolutely, you're right. I just
Yes.
I wanna
Yeah.
push that as far as we can,
Yeah,
because
because-
we've talked about this for so long and we haven't done anything. And so now that we're starting to move, I really wanna give it a shove.
And those
we
are all-
won't go all the
Well,
way
and-
there,
And,
right?
getting a bigger door. I mean, we want to get as many.
I agree.
Yeah.
I'd be the first to advocate for smaller lot sizes, reduced setbacks, and
Yeah.
opening up the opportunity to create more diversity and options in housing.
Right.
And
Yeah.
we don't have that right now. I mean, we just have such limitations, and
Yeah.
you start out here, well, you can't afford, you gotta start out here, I mean, you gotta start out with something that's manageable.
Right.
I mean, it doesn't mean everybody's gonna do that. I mean, it doesn't mean everybody's gonna build a tiny house on a 25-foot lot, I mean, there's still gonna be people that are gonna buy a 100-foot lot, and build on a 100-foot lot and build a 3,000 square foot house,
Yes.
But I agree, we need to have community discussion, because I've had those kind of discussions, and the first reaction is, well, I don't want that. And then when you explain it that way, it's like, oh, well, okay.
Yeah.
Right.
But, so it's gonna take a
That's
lot
always
of
the-
work.
that's always the
A lot of
challenge.
work to.
Yeah.
And then,
Change is hard. Change is hard. I mean,
And
people don't like it.
And to talk about what's charming, what's aesthetic, and those are all so subjective.
Yeah.
And it changes
Never
over
been
time.
great at that, is this community doesn't want to really have that conversation about
No.
what should it look like.
but they want to complain.
After the fact. That's,
Yeah, that's right. Oh, that's a nice one now. But one of the things too with the whole idea behind having like an accessory unit or whatever, because we've had people come, and maybe we're there, maybe we weren't, but have come here and said, oh, we want to have a VRBO. There's one right across the way. Why can't we do that? Well, because you're not in the zone. So at least for some of those people, I know that's a small quantity of people, but they could even think about it for themselves. It's like, okay, maybe he's now 10 feet closer to me or whatever, but I could also have a unit, and maybe that would be
Right.
a good
And,
thing for
you know,
them. And
maybe it's a small investment that really allows somebody to access a much better part of the value of their property.
right, right. Like
I mean, that argument was what, the VRBO conversation, like the other side, the advocacy for it, that was one of the pros.
Mhm.
And that wasn't a cost we were willing to accept. We didn't want to allow that at the cost of losing a big chunk of our existing housing to this.
Right.
But maybe we can still have that pro with just a slightly different use this
Right.
way.
Yeah, because we can say like, well, it's residential use, which
Yeah.
is what we want.
The live work options here. Are we saying in the residential district, or are we saying more in the mixed use
I took-
commercial district,
I
or?
took it that we were talking downtown and mixed use there, but maybe I'm wrong.
I think that's a question for
That's a
you.
zoning question, really.
I mean, I think.
I think our
live-
zoning
live-
wouldn't
I would say
be present.
I think live work is often allowed in residential areas. Because
We-
the uses that you allow in the work are meant to be things, well, they are allowed in residential areas because they're intended to look like they're residential units that allow somebody, again, to be probably in a more affordable situation. So I think the example that comes up a lot is an artist could have their studio in their unit where they live.
We've had that, we have that as a conditional
Home
use,
occupa- home
as a home
So it's a home
occupation.
occupation.
Yeah.
It could be
Mm.
looked at
In
that
the
way,
residential zones.
But we
Yeah.
got limitations on that too, in terms of types of.
Yeah. and
There's limitations
no
in the
retail.
definition. There's also a set of issues we've generally added as limitations. There's a path for that. And then the commercial zones, there are options for you to have residential uses as well. But I'm not, that one might be one that we don't need to spend a lot of time working on, because it might be something that's generally well allowed now. I mean, right now, there are buildings downtown where there are living units in them, and that's been there for a long, long time. There are other buildings downtown that I don't understand why there aren't. It seems like such an obvious thing that I would do with that space. And I don't think it's a zoning issue that's the obstacle. I think it's just whatever the personal
But for the
motivation is.
downtown, I thought it was, do we allow regular residential, regular?
We do as a conditional use above the first floor, so not
Oh,
on the
okay.
main street.
And that can be like monthly, that's not,
Can be just regular old, I live there.
okay, awesome.
Yeah, I mean, going forward, especially for the community, it probably would be beneficial to be clear on the things that are already allowed. So
Yeah,
live work isn't something where, it's not potential, it's already allowed.
Yeah.
yeah,
Let's treat it that way.
yeah.
You know, accessory dwelling unit, I thought that was one of those, but it's not, so,
And it really should be,
yeah.
because
Yeah.
it's out there.
Yeah. So, in response to, like, where are we going with some of this? I think we just want to make sure we're not going down a path that you are supporting or the community is not supporting. So, you know, right now, we've kind of said these are the types that Grand Marais could consider if they're all on the table, none are coming off, say. The other handout I gave you has lots of numbers on it. And if you look at the screen, it's these standards, and there's lots of them. The ones that are italicized are ones that you don't have today. So again, we don't want to go down the path of getting very specific about widths and depths and setbacks for uses that you're going to say, we're not, that doesn't even seem appropriate here. So if these all do seem like they could be appropriate, you know, we'll go to the next step of recommending some numbers, but, you know, again, lot width, you have that today, you know, we'd probably come back and say 75 should go down to something,
Yeah.
50, 60, whatever that number is. I was thinking we didn't want to go too far with that before we got some community input. So I think that's still, I guess I'm hearing kind of both sides of that. We need community input before we go too far.
I
Also,
think
we
we're
need to
gonna get
propose
input,
something.
but
You're gonna
it's
get
not gonna
input.
be about those numbers until we've had a little more of a conversation as a
Yeah.
community. And we need to have those numbers
To be able to,
in something that we think makes sense before we go and talk about the details with the community.
okay.
So that's, I can't, even- like, looking at that table, like, that, for anybody to make any sense of that doesn't spend
Yeah, that
hours on
wasn't-
it would be
yeah, that
really
wasn't
a
the
big
intent.
ask.
Yeah.
I think you asked the question to Mike about doing that minutia or that intensive work of like blowing up and like, okay, what can I do in this spot? And, oh, look at that big yard, what could I do there? You know, like, is that, who, does that need to get done? Is that our work? Is that their work? Like, who really, you know, if we're talking about, like, this is all we got, how do you look at what's there? And then you could say like, you know, if you set setbacks at this amount, this is, you potentially could add this many of these kind of dwellings. And if you set it this, you could add this many. I mean, like, who does that work?
I don't think we're gonna do that work.
Okay.
I suspect a lot of that would be felt as an overreach
Okay.
if we're drawing on people's fire property. But just as a counterpoint to that, and I think it's important for us to try and demonstrate in real terms how this might manifest here. And so taking a small section of a neighborhood and saying, it might look like this. And then, yeah, taking an existing aerial and drawing a couple of extra squares on it, something like that would be a useful way for us to give people a better idea of how it would be.
Just
And I
to-
even think
yeah.
like taking an existing, here's 3 houses and there's a picture from the street, and we actually try and
Yeah,
draw
I was wondering, can
in
you do
Yeah.
some three-dimensional
Yeah.
where the
drawing
buildings would
Yeah.
be.
And this is what it would look like, and this is
Yeah.
what it would. this
That's
is-
the intent.
So
yeah.
just a handful of those, so not like going through the whole
exactly.
community and
Yeah.
trying to say, we could add another 400 units if we
Right,
change
right.
this rule. But to say, this is what it would look like, and then just kind of knowing that there's a lot of opportunity for the units to be added. We don't really need to figure out how many, because it's not gonna happen at that level.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
Okay.
But I like your idea of taking random blocks and just kind of showing or highlighting how these changes could
That
impact,
visual will probably
impact that
do a
particular
lot for the
block.
public.
Not suggesting
Yeah.
that the owners of those properties are gonna,
Right.
you know,
Yeah.
rush out to do anything, you know.
Yeah.
I mean, I could put a house on, under these standards, put a house on the back part of my lot, you know.
Yeah.
I'm not gonna do that, I mean, you know, but would somebody else,
Well, when you're gonna sell it,
that's right. There'd be a value to it.
it's gonna add value to it, yeah, and
Yeah.
everybody has that situation that owns a piece of property in
Yeah.
town. And they regularly are thinking about it, you know, they want both sides of it, like, I don't want anybody to change anything, but I do wanna be able to access all the value of this property when I have to
When
sell
I'm
it.
ready, yeah.
Absolutely.
And, you know, great, I think so. So I had made a comment earlier about, you know, when we talk about where these things are appropriate, which I don't really wanna do, cause I don't wanna draw that map. But if you think about where the existing large pieces of property are that somebody might want to build one of these bigger types of units on, in my mind, they're in not residential zones. They're in commercial zones, particularly the CI zone along Highway 61, particularly on top of the hill. So you look at some of the buildings up there where commercial uses have not been successful. And there are a lot of housing units up there, and there's some larger pieces of property, including like pieces the city owns, for instance, where we've got a piece that's an acre and a half, and another piece that's an acre, that they're the perfect spot to think about, well, if we're gonna do an apartment building, or if we're gonna do a row house development, or something that's got 12 units or 20 units, that's where they'd go, in pieces like that. So it's not that we want to create that as a different zone, but maybe we need to make that zone residential. And then these rules that
Apply.
allow these
Would
buildings
guide them.
actually have, there's actually a place where somebody might be able
That's
to
a
do.
brilliant idea, yeah.
So here's the next steps I had, so we probably should figure out what's the right sequence. So, I had complete the draft definitions and standards for the potential types. That sounds like a yes, because we're moving forward with, these are the potential ones. We want to make those clear, including the standards. The survey, we're gonna maybe wait a month.
Well, let's We'll talk more about that.
Okay.
For sure, this month, I want to do something where we're communicating with the public and trying to get feedback.
Okay,
And I don't know what it's going to look like yet.
Okay.
We maybe can come up with a good idea for an online survey that helps with that.
just keep
Or-
it high level.
Or, yeah, or we might have to use some different tools, but we definitely want to start pushing this information out and giving people a venue to give us some feedback.
Yeah. And then the next thing we have is mapping of potential properties that, I think it's types of properties for infill. So in my mind, it was, different sizes, interior versus a corner opportunity. But we actually do draw, this is
And
what this
and
would
we're
look
just,
like.
we're not going to do the whole town, right? We're
Right.
going to pick a couple spots.
They're demonstration
Yeah.
sites, yep.
Okay.
So we have to do that mapping, then we do that illustration, and we'd come back to the planning commission to look at those.
Do we, as we are being recorded, are we live?
Yeah.
Or,
Oh, yeah.
and so like, do you ever,
Hello,
like,
America.
do you ever re-edit these things and cut them down, KP, and say like, as far as, like giving, is it ever useful to sort of share these conversations to a wider audience? To show, and then say like, hey, a survey's coming, and you can hear some of the conversations, because obviously we're addressing a lot of concerns that lots of people have, so like, maybe hearing that, would that be helpful, or?
We've done like a YouTube ad, like a 30-second YouTube ad where we're trying to get a message out.
Yeah, that
And-
was
and
great.
we'll cut and paste or ask you to do interviews or things like that. I don't know that we've ever
I
taken
think going back
big
and
chunks out of
splicing-
meetings and tried to edit it down to something that's
Down
more
to 4 minutes or a
digestible.
7-minute clip or something?
It's not out of the realm of possibility, but if we know exactly what we're trying to say, sometimes it's better just to say that.
So true, okay. I was just thinking strategically.
Wait a minute, what did you say?
Yeah, let it sink in. Is that a plan? People happy with what's going on here?
Love it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do we want to talk about the standards at all? The types of standards? You guys tell me, but, I have this list of, in my mind, lot width is really important, that you get that right, because today it's 75 no matter what, in residential. Again, lot depth, I'm not sure about, lot area, it just seems like lot width is gonna be the most important.
Let's talk about standards in this context. So you've got this table that you've
Yeah.
created for us, right?
Yeah,
Let's just understand how we're talking about standards. And that's that you take these uses and you say, if you're gonna have this formatting of building structures, then you need to have this width. And if you're gonna do this scale of building structure, you need this width. And so rather than having a bunch of zones where we say this is where the row houses go and all the lots need to be this wide, we say in anywhere in the residential zone, or if we want to split those into multiple zones, we can still do that. This type of housing requires these dimensions, or requires these setbacks, or this height.
Makes sense.
And that we're going to differentiate on those. So if there's something about any of these that you want to say right now, like, gosh, if somebody builds that, it can't be 35 feet tall, or this one doesn't need to have setbacks, then we could say that. If you want to think about it and be prepared to provide that feedback over time, or like within a week or something like that, that would work. Or if you just want to ask Jeff to give it a stab and come back with some thought out things to respond to.
I'll give you a quick example, lot width minimum, most cities have that. A more innovative way could be to also have a maximum, so that you don't get really large lots for single-family homes, for example, because maybe that's just what the city doesn't want. So that's something you could think of, but I have this list here, and there's numbers in here, so like that one, you could look at just the range of what the maximum would be for some of these housing types. But I think the bigger question is, do we even think about a lot with maximum? Because I don't think we should spend a lot of time on a standard that just isn't resonating, and, you know, it could be a future thing, like, well, let's think about that, maybe we do that down the road, but it doesn't seem really important.
My initial response to that is
I'll vote for you,
because,
Mike, don't worry.
because we're already
I got his vote.
talking about generally platted properties, that the lot width maximum isn't gonna be relevant very often.
Right.
You know, that if we're creating new plats with new lots, that might be something we want to do. But if we're creating new plats with new lots, we're probably also talking about new utilities. And so I don't know if any of this conversation is quite as relevant then. But it does kind of remind me of what the follow-up step is after we make these changes, is we gotta look at our subdivision ordinance.
Right.
And, because there's some inconsistencies there between what it says and what we're trying to do here. And that, we don't have to deal with those inconsistencies right away, but at some point we do.
Yeah. Yeah, and if there's, you know, if there's something on here that you have today, so if you have strong feelings about lot coverage, I mean,
I think lot coverage is an important one to have. Just
Really?
just because if you start to reduce your lot width and square footage, do we want to see, you know, edge to edge, front to
Well,
back?
but that's where we have our setbacks. I mean, we still have setbacks, is what we were
Well,
talking about.
Do we or don't we? I mean, that's, you
Okay.
know, so, and the question is then is how do you incorporate all this? I mean, if you look at some of these drawings here, the lot coverage gets to be fairly significant,
Yeah.
which I think changes the character of,
Mhm.
you know. So, if you
Well, I
have a
think
smaller lot, you have a smaller house on it. You don't try to cram I mean, but that gets
It's a little
back-
differential equation for me too, like, if you've got 30% lot coverage, I can imagine a taller building. If you've got 80% lot coverage and it's a taller building, now you've really changed the character.
Yeah.
Like, it's exponentially changed the volume of space that this use is taking. And it's that volume, I think, that people are gonna feel the imposition on more than just the closeness or the height or anything else.
I mean, I think all the
Really?
examples here,
Okay.
the photos, you know, really show things in a good proportion.
Right.
But
But it's not the maximum of
that,
what our ordinance would allow.
that doesn't necessarily mean that
Right.
everybody's gonna, you know, look at that and say, oh, that's how I'll do it. I'm gonna put another two
Yeah.
stories on top of that, and,
So that's something to think about is, okay, well, if we're gonna allow 8 structures on a 100-foot lot like this, maybe they have to be 1 story. Maybe they can only be 25 feet tall. Maybe there's other rules that we put in place to try to mitigate that. And we've added additional units and density, but we've also mitigated some of the real concerns people would have.
yeah, and actually that is something that I've seen with that courtyard housing, is sometimes they do limit it to 1 story. Because of the way the proportion just gets,
I mean, a story or a story and a half or
Yeah.
something or other, so you don't have this,
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah.
tall elevator shaft sticking up into the, you
Yeah.
know.
yeah. So, yeah, and that could even just be, I could send out an email saying, please give me your input on this, just to you, to have you react to these, I think. I think that would be helpful, so we don't spend time on standards that you don't think we're gonna use long-term.
So you would say the coverage over all else being the most important, or being the one that you would want to see in the ordinance?
I would like to still retain a maximum lot coverage, just because I just don't think we want to see edge-to-edge development, you know.
We have zones where we don't have a lot coverage maximum.
Right.
Including the mixed-use zone
Right.
right
Oh.
now.
Just the R districts, I think, have it, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
and, you know, that, looking at some of those more commercial zones is a way to imagine how this might play out in the residential zones. I mean, even in some of the residential zones, you can imagine how this might play out. Look at like the Cascades building.
Mhm. Yeah, right.
On Second and First Avenue and think, well, that was developed before zoning existed, right? But that's the idea is this incremental growth of something slightly bigger than what was there before. Its lot coverage lot line to lot line, but it seems to fit in with, so it could pop up in any random block, and over time, it would still seem to fit in with, it would seem normal. So I don't think you have to have a lot coverage maximum. And if you're concerned about that, you can manage it with just setbacks. I think that's what you were suggesting.
Yeah.
But you can still do both. I mean, that's what we've got now.
Well, I
And
think
maybe it's not even a lot coverage maximum, maybe it's a square footage of the structure,
Like square footage to the
gross
lot
square
size?
footage,
Yeah.
that,
Okay, gross square
that
footage
takes
to
into account
total
multiple,
lot.
multiple stories, so that you end up
Gotcha.
with something that's proportional to the size of the lot.
Gotcha, so it could be
Because
up
even
or-
if you met the 10-foot
okay.
setback, you might not have something that's proportional to that lot, if you go too tall. I mean, that's my concern, is that if you went too tall,
Yeah.
you all of a sudden change.
This is maybe a way that we can start to interact with the community about this issue, is the interplay between these rules, not asking them, do you care about lot coverage maximum, but asking them, is it more important to preserve views, or to have light, or to have space?
Yes.
Or, prioritize them. You only get to pick one, which is the most important. So then we can start thinking about when we have to decide between more lot coverage or height, like which one is more important to people.
yeah, it's tricky because oftentimes
Yeah.
cities will go down the road of, I think you're kind of describing floor area ratio. So cities will have floor area ratio, lot coverage, setbacks, and if you just do the math, they're conflicting
Yeah.
because they're circular. So some of these things, I think the lot coverage, you would back into it and have to say, instead of 30, it should be, it might be 60 or 70, and people might think, oh, that's too high. And it's like, well, is it? Like, why is 30 a good number? It's just been there. One of the ways, the thing we have under there is private open space minimum. That's another way to look at it, especially as you're doing higher density. It's like, how much yard space in square feet do you think people want when you're sharing it, or a row house, you have a smaller yard naturally. You kind of start to get at those numbers, but
I mean, that would be good to hear from the community about those kind of, issues, because, I mean, I sat in on conversations where, people list out all their wants and desires, and of course, you can't do it. You're well beyond an affordable house.
Yeah.
But if you sat down, we're, talking about a courtyard project, a courtyard house project, what kind of space would people think that they would need to feel comfortable, living in close proximity to their neighbors like that?
yeah.
And to have them prioritize, what
Yeah,
of
it's
these.
tough to ask people the how much question.
Well, I know it is.
Because they always
Well-
overestimate.
Yeah.
Right, and I think I was trying to think of a way to show people what it would look like. And it
Yeah.
would be so nice if we could have.
Like, how about this?
Not a real, well, yeah, but not like a real, but more like a digital, like, here's what 30% looks like, here's what 70% would look like, here's what, the different variations. and
I
just
think it's
having-
more interesting to back into it and say, how's this feel? And have them respond.
Well, we could show.
And then tell them what it is,
Ah,
Because we always
Right,
get
because
these
they'll get-
arbitrary
no, I
lines
gotcha.
that we're trying to defend for no reason, but we
Right,
really
right,
ought to
right.
just respond first. Like, okay, that seems fine.
So can we take some
Well, it's
examples
80%.
from
Yeah.
some other communities, not.
Not from Marais.
let's not,
From Grand
yeah,
Marais?
let's not do that
It's like,
again.
oh, that's theirs. No, that's, go to some other
Let's
community.
do Silver Bay,
Yeah.
that'd be great.
I think they probably will recognize a few of those too, so.
Some nondescript community that has some good
Silver
map,
Bay.
good mapping.
Beautiful Preston, Minnesota.
Yeah, there, Preston, Minnesota. How many people have been there? So, yes, right.
So
Or we start with our own homes.
Ours were in there. That didn't help. So we're gonna go to Preston.
yeah, so I mean, one way we could start is we could recommend the standards that we think we should focus on, and or
Let's talk more about that.
change.
Let's see if we can figure out a way to make the survey help us with this question.
Yeah, because
Yeah.
lot coverage I think is a good one, because I've looked at that before, and for this project, it's hard to find the right number. And you can go to lots of cities that have similar numbers to you, but that's just because they haven't looked at it. I mean, it's just there, so.
Yeah.
And then lots of cities, lots of cities don't have it. So you think, well, why is that? Because they do it in other ways.
Yeah.
So to me, it seems like one you think about maybe going away. I mean, we do have to deal with the North Shore Management Plan, which has a number also, which I don't totally understand how that gets enforced, but
It doesn't.
that's also has its own number.
Mm.
So we don't want to talk about that. That's
Not tonight. We'll deal with that in a little bit.
Yeah,
North Shore
but-
Management
So
Plan.
maybe the next step seems to me like we recommend something like, these are the ones we think we need to get input on.
Well, let's see if we can translate that, which is jargony, into a list of issues that people can relate to. Like, how do these affect people's lives? And can we ask questions about that and get good feedback? That's what I want to try to do. I don't know if we can, but that's what I want to try to do.
Go for it.
I mean, at the end of the day, the changes even if you didn't do half of what we're talking about, having standards for housing types that say didn't require a conditional use permit, that's a pretty big change.
Big change.
You know, reducing specific standards like lot width and increasing lot coverage, whatever they are, I mean, those are big changes
Mhm.
that
They'll allow us to move
they will
the
help
direction we
with
want
the
to
other
go.
two things you have to figure out. Who's
Mhm.
gonna build it and where should it go? Where's the land?
Yeah.
But I think they're big changes anyway. So if we can keep on this, like, there's lots of options and they all are feasible, I think that'd be great.
Okay,
We're good?
I think
There you
so.
go.
Something to do.
Yeah. It sounds like we might be sending you homework between now and your next meeting.
Oh, good, I couldn't
Maybe.
wait for my last part.
Oh, you could have.
What's a good way to get input? Is to
Well, this
just
is
have people have to
good,
think
good
about it.
discussion. It was, you know, man, this has been such an important issue, and, you know, we've just struggled with trying to figure out, you know, how to make something happen. And hopefully that this effort will produce something that will cause housing to be developed.
Yeah. Thanks, everybody.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, thanks.